We're going to start as a quick housekeeping announcement. There are now 7 in-session comm docs online. As the chair will mention, we'll probably do these after lunch. I just wanted to note that there is one missing, and that's the Ecuador drafting group, the drafting group on the application of Article 13 in Ecuador. We expect this to be online at 9 o'clock. So 7 comm docs, and the last one on Ecuador expected to be available at 9 o'clock so that we can review all of them immediately after lunch. We have a very tight program today, so please be on time.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Today's the last day of the meeting, and I have worked with the Secretariat yesterday evening to come up with a plan forward so that we'll be able to accomplish the work that's been assigned to us in the agenda. We have identified several documents, and you have seen that the document recommendation is for noting. And so my proposal is for us to agree to simply note these documents without further introduction or discussion. For many of these documents, the chair of the Intersessional Working Group or the Secretariat had asked for views or guidance or comments on the work under the specific item or COP decision. Therefore, I propose, similar to what we have done yesterday for certain agenda items, is to invite the Standing Committee to invite the Secretariat, request the Secretariat to issue a notification to the parties within 1 week of this meeting, inviting members of the Standing Committee, observer parties, and observers to submit any comments on the document to the Secretariat before December 31st, 2023, so that the work mandated by the COP can proceed without having to have robust discussions on the floor. The Standing Committee will also request that the Secretariat forward these comments, inputs, received through the notification to the parties, to the chairs of the intersessional working groups, or consider the comments in the further work as appropriate. And so I have proposed that as a way forward, and I will go and slowly read through the items that I have identified as needing the action is for noting. I'll go very slow. So the first one is 11, rules of procedure for the COP. 12, emerging operational matters of the committees. 20, World Wildlife Trade Report. 22, language strategy. 26, CITES Gender Action Plan. 37, possession of specimens of species in Appendix 1. 30, demand reduction to combat illegal trade. 38, review of Resolution Comp 11.3, Rev Cop 19. 44, conservation and control of trade in Tibetan antelope. 48, purpose of transaction code. 49, electronic systems and information technology. 50, stocks and stockpiles. 53, rapid movement of wildlife diagnostic samples and musical instruments. 54, specimens produced through biotechnology. 56, disposal of confiscated specimens. 57, labeling for trade in caviar. And 60, identifying information on species at risk of extinction affected by international trade. I know this is a lot, and I know that we've all prepared for months to have these discussions at the meeting. This is the only way forward I can see for us to be able to still provide input and comments and influence and inform the work and allow for us to have discussions on the floor for some of the remaining items that require discussion here together. This morning, we will take up items 32.3, 32.2, as well as 32.1 all together under national reports when they first appear on the work program. And we'll also take up items 31, national laws for the implementation of the convention. I would like to put all of these in the morning since they do require some discussion to make sure that we're able to have those. We are, I'm also proposing that unless there is an update from the Secretariat or new information or an edit to their recommendations, that we don't do introductions of documents and we focus on the discussion and the recommendations. And I really am imploring the committee to respect the time limits on interventions to 2 minutes for observer parties and 1 minute for observer organizations. And I feel with this plan, if you guys agree, we can get through the rest of the agenda. We can still provide comments and we can have discussions where we need to have discussions together. And I'm just looking to the committee. Do you guys agree? Is that as a proposed way forward? Okay. And so in these items that we're going to have request the Secretariat to send a notification to the parties, I will just note in the record that we've agreed in the beginning of the meeting to note this document and request that the Secretariat follow up with a notification to the parties to solicit comments on this document. Does anyone have any questions or comments before we begin with item number 71? And it is my plan to take up all of the comm docs and the executive summaries at right after lunch. Okay, with that, we can start today with item number 71, implications of the transfer of species from one appendix to another, SC 77, Doc 71. We will not have an introduction, and I will open the floor to comments from members of the Standing Committee. Any comments from members of the Standing Committee? Any comments from observer parties? Comments from observer organizations?
Just say it again.
Yep, just to be clear for the folks who are entering the room, we are on agenda item number 71. implications of the transfer of a species from one appendix to another. I give the floor to the United States.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the North America region. The North America region supports directing the Secretariat to develop draft guidance and best practices related to periods of transition and possible transitory measures related to amendments to the appendices adopted by the Conference of the Parties. In undertaking the exercise, the Secretariat should consult with experts, including from parties and relevant other bodies, and also consult with the Animals and Plants Committee on any scientific and technical issues as appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, the United States. Any other comments from members of the committee, observer parties, or observer organizations? Does the committee agree to the recommendations in document 13? Okay, the committee agrees. I will note the comments made on the floor, and we will move to the next agenda item, which is agenda item 33.9, application of Article 13 in Guinea. And I give the floor to the Secretariat.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am referring to document 33.9 and its annex, which was published last week after the Secretariat's October mission to Guinea. Guinea has been under Article 13 since for 10 years with respect to, and the committee has decided to implement Article 13 until Guinea had undertaken a series of measures approved by the Standing Committee. In 2021, the Standing Committee exceptionally allowed the export and import of a stock of Pterocarpus arenaceus, which had been illegally harvested and seized in 2009-10. This, as long as Guinea undertook certain safeguard measures as well as other measures that the committee had agreed. As the annex indicates, in October 2003, the Secretariat undertook a mission to Guinea to check the export situation in the field, as well as to hold an workshop on IQIC indicators and to implement the compliance assistance program. Based on the conclusions drawn by the Secretariat after its mission, the Secretariat has noted that 1,200 containers over 20,000 cubic meters were loaded and sent from Guinea, which means that at least 7,500 cubic meters were illegally exported in violation of the ban on logging exports and in violation of the convention. The Secretariat has also noted that the CITES Management Authority managed the export operation poorly, and that the two people in charge were suspended by the minister and replaced. And finally, the Secretariat has noted that there should be investigations carried out in order to ensure that those involved in wood trafficking would be brought to trial. It should also be indicated that China, as an importing country, did its utmost to assist Guinea in this operation and refused to accept more than 12,842 cubic meters, which was the stock that had been inventoried in 2021 by Guinea. Based on this conclusion, the Secretariat updated the recommendations and proposed revised recommendations that are presented in the document annex. The Secretariat is prepared to indicate what amendments have been proposed if necessary. The Compliance Assistance Program will be in place until 2024, and that should help with the implementation of some of these recommendations and the funding that comes from the sale of the timber in question. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, the Secretariat. I give the floor to Genny.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam. It is indeed the case that Guinea has been involved in exporting pterocarpus to China for the over 12,000 cubic meters, some over the original 14,000 cubic meters. I would like to thank the Secretariat for the mission that was carried out to Guinea last October. The mission allowed for a clear understanding of the whole process, but more importantly, it really did sound the alarm for the authorities. In order to ensure that this export was properly handled, a committee was set up and the whole process seemed to go smoothly until it was noted that there was a complete problem with the process, which had to do with some problems with export to China, and there was a missing certificate of origin for a significant quantity of the pterocarpus of the officially exported amount, and that had nothing to do with the original excess. Now, since 2013, Guinea is in a situation where there are no commercial transactions allowed. We therefore have opted for a very strict attitude to all those officials and their accomplices who were involved in these sorts of dubious operations. So the CITES Management Authority people were fired, and there has been a careful investigation of all those involved. In other words, Guinea has taken on board all of the Secretariat's recommendations and has undertaken to implement them as soon as possible, particularly with respect to making public the receipts for the sale of the pterocarpus stocks and having 40% of those stocks held in security by the CITES Management Authority in its fight against wildlife crime. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Genny. I now open the floor to members of the Standing Committee for comments. I open the floor to observer parties. I open the floor to observer organizations. With that, I think the committee agrees on the recommendations in document 33.9. The recommendations found in document 33.9, addendum 27. Okay, in the addendum, 33.9, paragraphs 27, 28, 29, and 30. With that, I conclude this agenda item, and we will move to the next one, which is 44, the conservation of and control in Tibetan antelope. And as we agreed this morning, this is one of the documents that we agreed to note and request the Secretary send out a notification to follow up with the committee, observer organizations, and observer parties with comments. And so the next item I will open up is 55, Saiga antelope. 65, Saiga antelope. So there's no additional information besides what's in the document from the Secretariat. And so I open the floor to comments from the Standing Committee. I give the floor to Poland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We take note of the progress range states, parties, and important consumer and trading countries and regions of Saiga parts and derivatives have made on the implementation of the work program for Saiga antelope. We thank the parties for these activities and the Secretariat for their support and assistance. We raise concern, however, over low level of reporting by range states. We also agree with guidance by the Secretariat on the use of source code U in para 20. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Poland. I now open the floor to observer parties and give the floor to Kazakhstan.
Kazakhstan would like to thank the Secretariat for organizing this meeting and the WIS government for its hospitality. In addition, we is proud to report that significant conservation efforts at the national level led to remarkable recovery of the Saiga antelope in Kazakhstan. In 2023, the population of the Saiga reached nearly 2 million individuals, and we urge the Standing Committee to recognize this conservation success. On the same time, the growing population of Saiga carries human-wildlife conflict in the country, which has been discussed at the consultative meeting that resulted in development of the strategy for conservation and management of Saiga in Kazakhstan. This meeting was organized by CITES Secretariat and also CITES Secretariat was participated. In light of this issue, Kazakhstan would like to provide an update on the recent amendments to the regulation nationally relating to Saiga use. Status of Saiga nationally has been changed to enable control of its population. Saiga population management included domestic use of Saiga meat as a result of implementing control measures is undertaken by a governmental organization. These measures also include marking and storing Saiga horns under the strict governmental control without any use and trade. As mentioned in the document 65, Kazakhstan is considering, propose and amending the existing Saiga annotation. Having remained fully committed to implementing CITES decision, Kazakhstan would like highly appreciate the support of the CITES Secretariat on establishing internal market control and stockpile management. In relation to internal market control, Kazakhstan also would like to know that decision 19.213 paragraph B is only directed to the Saiga range states, omitting trading countries, which is inconsistent with the medium-term international work program for the Saiga antelope. In order to address this omission, Kazakhstan suggests a standing committee to recommend to the Conference of Parties to revise and renew decision 19.213 paragraph B, which is clearly articulates establishing internal market control in trading countries, in addition to range states, to adoption by the Conference of Parties at COP20. In addition, Kazakhstan supports recommendation to follow Resolution Conference 18.7 on legal equity finding in relation to using code U. Kazakhstan would encourage CITES Secretariat to provide guidance on using source code U, including sufficient justification for using code U in addition to Resolution Conference 12.3 and the guide to the applications of the CITES source codes. We also would like to inform the Standing Committee that Kazakhstan submitted the annual illegal trade reports for the years 2021 and 22 to the Secretariat in October this year and ask Standing Committee to take note of these reports. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kazakhstan. I give the floor to the United States.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Speaking on behalf of the United States, we support the committee taking note of the progress range state parties and important consumer and trading countries and regions of SIGA parts and derivatives have made on implementation of the medium-term International Work Program for SIGA Antelope for 2021-2025. We support directing the Secretariat to remind SIGA range states and important consumer and trading countries and regions to refer to Resolution Conf 18.7 when verifying the legal origin and only use source code U in accordance with the provisions of 12.3. By way of a clarifying edit, we note that the citation in paragraph 15 of the document should be to the complete Animals Committee record from AC 32, which is AC 32 SR, pages 33 through 35. Additionally, we would like to remind parties that Decision 19.213 encourages range states of SIGA antelope to establish internal market controls. And as the point was just made by the delegation from Kazakhstan, we agree that, that this decision should be renewed and referred to consumer parties as well, and not simply range state parties. We continue to stress the importance of stockpile management and monitoring and urge parties possessing stockpiles of SIGA specimens to share information, including volume, provenance, condition, etc., on them with the Secretariat. We appreciate Kazakhstan contacting the Secretariat to request assistance with stockpile management and monitoring, and we hope that the Secretariat will be able to provide the requested assistance and urge other parties requiring such assistance to contact the Secretariat. We note that clarity on the status and management of existing stockpiles is critical in being able to effectively evaluate any proposal to amend the appendices, including any proposal to amend the existing annotation for SIGA species. Noting that Kazakhstan has indicated that it may submit a proposal to amend this annotation at COP20, we stress that parties provide this information to the Secretariat in order to have an accurate and robust report to SC78 and be able to effectively evaluate any proposals submitted to COP20. Finally, we note that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service continues to provide financial assistance for on-the-ground projects in support of SIGA conservation within the species range, management of SIGA horn stockpiles, and to demand reduction efforts. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, United States. I'm going to close the list, and we have closing the list. Next, I will give the floor to Rwanda.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. I just changed my seat, and I will be speaking on behalf of the Russian Federation. I beg your pardon. We would like, first of all, to mention that due to technical reasons, the report on SIGA antelopes from the Russian Federation was a bit late, and it is being published in the information documents section, so that in case you don't see it in the Secretariat compilation, the information of our side is in there. What we would like to stress is that due to the ban on SIGA hunting since 1999, there are no trade reserves of SIGA horns in Russia, which means the absence of a legal domestic market. Confiscated horns are stored only as forensic evidence until the completion of investigation. After that, the authorities dispose of them, which means destruction by burning. In 2013, the federal government introduced criminal liability for hunting and trafficking of SIGA and its parts. As noted in document 65, SIGA horns make up the majority of the trade by weight,
with exporters applying primarily the origin code U, which means unknown. Given that the Saiga antelope range has clear geographical boundaries, the possibility of re-export of Saiga parts with origin code U for us is a matter of serious concern. The involvement of Saiga parts of unknown origin and trade operation may be used to legalize possible illegal shipments. The Russian Federation tends to be in favor of introducing a restriction on exports and re-exports of Saiga specimens of unknown origin. We therefore to propose to include in the recommendations of the Standing Committee a request to the Secretariat to compile, in cooperation with interested countries, an information document on potential impact of introducing a suspension on possibility to apply U code of origin to Saiga antelope specimen. Thank you.
Can you just repeat that new recommendation one more time?
Yeah, request the Secretariat to compile, in cooperation with interested countries, an information document on potential impact of introducing a suspension on possibility to apply U code of origin to Saiga antelope specimen. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor now to China, and for folks to please respect the time limit on interventions if we're going to make it through today.
Thanks, Chair. China is grateful to the Secretariat for preparing this document, commending Kazakhstan and other range countries for their tremendous efforts in protecting the Saiga antelope. The significant increase in the wild population of Saiga antelopes fully demonstrates that by working together with range, transit, and consuming countries under the CITES platform, we can effectively protect Saiga antelopes and curb smuggling of Saiga antelopes' horns. It should be said that this is another successful example of executing CITES. At the same time, we also note with concern that the sharp increase in the wild population of this species has caused serious human-wildlife conflicts and increased the risk of epidemics. It is necessary for the international community to support Kazakhstan in taking proactive population control measures to reduce human-wildlife conflicts and the risk of epidemics, maintain the enthusiasm of local residents to protect the Saiga antelope, and obtain economic benefits from this population regulation. China is willing to work closely with Kazakhstan and other range countries to rebuild China's wild Saiga antelope population as soon as possible by promoting the reintroduction of Saiga antelopes while intensifying efforts to combat smuggling. China suggests that the Standing Committee shows its support to Kazakhstan in its efforts to enhance the management of the wild population of Saiga antelopes and to explore the potential legal and sustainable trade in related products, as well as the livelihoods benefits of such trade, where local communities are engaged in the value chain. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, China. I give the floor to Nigeria.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nigeria commends Kazakhstan and other range states for their tremendous efforts in protecting the Saiga antelope. This is another successful example of the conservation of iconic species by CITES. We therefore request Standing Committee to give support to Kazakhstan to actively carry out their regulation of the wild population of Saiga antelopes and to explore ways to allow Kazakhstan to legally utilize related products. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Nigeria, and I give the floor to CMS.
Thank you, Chair. We congratulate the government of Kazakhstan on the conservation achievement that allowed their saiga populations to grow rapidly in recent years, bringing this antelope back from the brink of extinction. This is one of the world's few conservation success stories. CMS is proud to have facilitated the work on saiga through the CMS Saiga MOU, bringing together range state governments, experts and NGOs, including through 2 missions earlier this year. As laid out in Document 65, the government of Kazakhstan intends to propose reopening international trade in saiga derivatives. We would therefore like to reiterate the importance of implementing the strategy that has been developed to make sure that global efforts to conserve saiga are not harmed by domestic or international use that Kazakhstan plans to propose. I would also note that CMS will convene the 5th meeting of signatories to the saiga MOU in early 2025, which may facilitate preparations on the subject for CITES COP20. Thank you.
Thank you, CMS. I give the floor to Canada.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the reports and for the updates from some of the range parties. Canada briefly wishes to take the floor to react to the additional recommendation proposed by the Russian Federation. I understood that the Russian Federation requested the Secretariat to compile an information document with associated parties. We don't think that it's appropriate to ask the Secretariat to prepare information documents. I would suggest rather that, especially given the time constraints, that the Standing Committee might wish to take note of the concerns regarding the impacts of applying source code U on saiga specimens, and then further encourage the relevant parties to perhaps discuss the issue, and if there is something they wish to bring to the Conference of the Parties, to do so. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Canada. I give the floor to Conservation Force.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This intervention is on behalf of 8 organizations, a list of which we will submit later. We would like to align ourselves with the intervention of China supporting Kazakhstan remarkable efforts in the conservation of saiga. A population that has increased from 21,000 individuals to more than 1,300,000, it's indeed a big success. And however, because of the success, saiga antelopes have transitioned from being sacred animals to perceived pests. Particularly in the Rusk region, local communities have expressed concerns about saiga competing with livestock for pastures and trampling croplands. As the custodian of more than 90% of the global saiga antelope population, Kazakhstan deserves the chance to kickstart legitimate, sustainable use programs, which should include, inter alia, essential measures for equitable benefit sharing with local communities. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Conservation Force. And so I'm now going to talk to the Standing Committee and just sort of summarize what I heard. I heard support for Kazakhstan and their recovery of the saiga antelope. There was a recommendation for to invite the Secretary to provide guidance on use of source code O for trade in saiga antelope. There was a recommendation from the Russian Federation to compile information with range states to talk about the potential impacts of using source code U for trade in saiga, and there was support from, I think, Kazakhstan as well as the United States for the Secretariat to review and revise decision 19.213 and submit it to COP. And so I want to see what your thoughts are about those 3 proposals. And Canada did propose that we note the comment made by the Russian Federation, and Is there support for noting the comment? Okay, so the Standing Committee agrees to note the comment made by the Japan. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We support all recommendations contained in document 65. It is very much encouraging that the population of Saiga antelope in Kazakhstan has dramatically increased. And we hope the conservation status of this species will further improve through continued efforts by range states. Thank you.
Thank you, Japan. So we support recommendation A in the document in paragraph 22. We agree to recommendation B. There's a new recommendation on renewing and revising decision 19.23, and for the Standing Committee to submit that forward to COP. All right, there's support for that new recommendation. And then for the Secretary to take note, the Standing Committee to take note of the impacts concerning applying source code U for trade in Saiga specimens. We can take note of that. And in regards to the guidance requested by Kazakhstan, to remind the Standing Committee and the parties to use the guidance in the resolution for the application of source code U. Kazakhstan, were you looking for guidance on source code U or source code O?
Source code U.
Well, yeah. Okay, so we can use the guidance in the resolution, the United States.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just in addition to the recommendation of noting the concerns raised in the discussion here on source code U, just an additional point with that recommendation to submit a document to COP20 if appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, United States. So we will amend that decision on the renewing. We'll take note of that comment. Thank you. We'll take note of all the comments on the floor. And so with that, I will close this agenda item and we will move forward to the next item on the agenda is 50, stocks and stockpiles. The committee agreed in the beginning of the meeting to note this document and have the Secretariat follow up with the parties in the committee for comments with a notification. And that is the same for agenda item 56, disposal of confiscated specimens. The committee will note this document, agrees to note this document, and invites the Secretariat to send out a notification to the parties to solicit input on the document. And so the next item up for discussion that I will open up is item number 16, CITES Strategic Vision. Okay. I will give the floor to the Convention for Biological Diversity for some comments. The Executive Secretary.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the opportunity to address this Standing Committee despite the very busy schedule. The Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework adopted last year in Montreal is an ambitious plan for all sectors working to address the biodiversity crisis. It was developed with strong inputs from CITES and other multilateral environmental agreements, and it will only be implemented successfully with the full engagement of all, including the constituencies that this convention brings together as part of a whole-of-society approach. We're therefore very encouraged by the mandate from your COP19 for this body and the scientific committees to consider the alignment between the framework and the CITES strategic vision. As countries are now embarking on setting their national targets aligned with the framework and updating their national biodiversity strategies and action plans, there's an important opportunity for the scientific and management authorities of this convention to be engaged in the process. In its requirements for non-detriment findings and legal acquisition findings, CITES provides important tools and experience to support Target 5 of the framework, requiring the harvesting, trade and use of wild species to be sustainable, safe and legal. But as the mapping exercise in the document shows, the interlinkages between CITES and the Global Biodiversity Framework go much wider. For example, the targets in the framework related to customary sustainable use and human-wildlife conflict, as well as those related to values and valuation, finance, capacity development, data, and the engagement of indigenous peoples and local communities, women and youth, are all relevant. I sincerely believe that the effective implementation of CITES contributes to the achievement of the goals and targets of the framework, and likewise, implementation of the framework complements measures taken under this convention, supporting our overall joint purpose. We in the CBD Secretariat are committed to continue to work closely together and to further strengthen our joint efforts to halt and reverse the loss of biodiversity. I thank you.
Thank you, Acting Assistant Secretary. I open the floor to the Standing Committee for comments on this document. Okay, great. We'll start with the United States.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Speaking on behalf of the North America region, we agree with directing the Secretariat to submit Indicator 1.4.1 for Objective 1.4 to COP20 for adoption. We note that the parties in our region have a number of comments concerning additional proposed indicators for Objective 1.4, including over-reliance on the IUCN Red List, and amendments to Resolution Comp 16.4, including missing linkages to the GBF and reference to the monitoring framework. And we suggest that the Standing Committee Chair be invited to work with the Secretariat to prepare a revised version of the amendments, taking into account points from Standing Committee members and parties submitted electronically or via notification to the parties, and submit for consideration to COP20. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, United States. I give the floor to New Zealand.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank Secretariat for presenting this paper. We agreed with the comments made by North America, but especially regarding recommendation D in paragraph 19, we believe that the proposed indicators presented 1.4.2 and 1.4.3 require quite a bit more work. That apart from lookalike species, only threatened species that are or may be affected by international trade are eligible for listing in the CITES appendices. The key statistic we believe that is being sought is how many threatened species at risk of international trade are not yet listed on the CITES appendices. We don't really understand the relevance of 1.4.3, which seems to be mainly about lookalikes, most of which are not likely to be affected by international trade. However, we recognise that this is not so simple because once NDFs are done for those species, they may identify that some of the lookalike species are both threatened and are or may be detrimentally affected by international trade. Rather than going to the Standing Committee Chair, we suggest that the proposed indicators are referred back to the scientific committees for discussion and redrafting. So that would be at Animals Committee 33 and Plants Committee 26, I believe. And then for them to report back to Standing Committee 78 on their refinement of those indicators. Thank you.
Thank you, New Zealand. I give the floor to Brazil.
Thanks, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor. And Brazil would like to thank the Secretariat for preparing this paper. And we have a short comment on document 16. We had spent some time in trying to understand the rationale behind the mapping of the CITES strategic vision against the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals and the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which is found in the Annex 1 of the document. I'm sorry to say that this mapping still seems confusing to us, and as there seems to have been a kind of cherry-picking of KM-GBF's objectives and goals. For instance, with regards CITES objective 4.1, it's our opinion that since we are referring to goal C of the KM-GBF, which deals with the fair and sharing of the monetary and non-monetary benefits from the utilization of genetic resources and digital sequence information on genetic resources, and of traditional knowledge associated with genetic resources, its corresponding target 13 needed to be also mentioned, and it was not. So perhaps the best way to move forward on this is to reassess this document and bring it back to our next meeting. Speaking in more general terms, we understand that this exercise is considered to be a starting point for an assessment of how CITES can contribute to the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework and its monitoring framework. Maybe it's time for us to start discussing how the KM-GBF can provide good examples for CITES, particularly regarding the provision of means of implementation. Indeed, the GBF provides for one goal and some targets on financing, capacity building and development, access to and transfer of technology, development of and access to innovation, and technical and scientific cooperation. In particular, Goal D and targets 19 and 20 of the KM-GBF recognize the special needs of developing countries with regards means of implementation. They also acknowledge the obligation of developed countries to increase the biodiversity-related international financial resources to developing countries to at least $20 billion per year by 2025 and to at least $30 billion per year by 2030, in line with the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. Madam Chair, we have spent the last 5 days discussing many compliance matters, the great majority of them related to developed country parties. In our view, these discussions cannot be detached from a serious discussion about means of implementation. We sincerely hope that all parties will join us in our concern in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. I give the floor to the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Chair. We support the submission of the draft indicator 1.4.1 to the next Conference of Parties as per Recommendation C. We also support the US and New Zealand interventions to facilitate further consideration of any additional indicators. And we echo the comments of New Zealand on the framing of the draft indicators in paragraph 19D. Thank you.
Thank you, United Kingdom. I give the floor to Georgia.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Indeed, I agree that the mapping of the strategic vision of CITES and Kunming-Montreal targets and indicators needs a revision. But here I would like to mention one more target, target 19 particularly, which was already mentioned. However, I would like to highlight another component of this target, target 19B, which refers to increasing domestic resource mobilization facilitated by preparation and implementation of the national biodiversity finance plans or similar instruments according to national needs, priorities, and circumstances. And I would like to highlight that this component is also highly relevant to CITES. As from our experience developing and implementing the National Biodiversity Finance Plan, it really helped us to increase the state budget and ensure sustainability of public funding for CITES activities such as field surveys of highly exported species such as snowdrops in our case. And as well, this financial solutions in these plans also include the activities which support avoiding future expenditures and efficient use of existing resources, which is also very important. For example, we could assess introduction of the natural resource or regulatory fees, which would allow us further to ensure further resource, to ensure us collect further resources for implementation of the convention. And at the same time, for the suggested amendments in the resolution 16.4, namely the last amendment form, which encourages parties to take into account the information gathered for development of non-detriment findings. I would suggest that this could be not only information on used for the non-detriment findings, but also other information on implementation of CITES, which is also quite relevant for GBF targets. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Georgia. I will take comments from some observer parties. Please respect the time limit and keep them brief. And I'm going to close the list now. I give the floor to Bahrain.
Thank you, Chair. Bahrain appreciates the Secretariat's analysis on the KMGBF CITES linkages. Bahrain supports publishing the mapping on the CITES website and supports the recommendations presented in document 16. However, with regards to recommendation little d about refining an indicator specific to using IUCN data, the use of IUCN data to facilitate the periodic review process is encouraged in Resolution COM 14.8, Rev COP 19, which may eliminate the need for these draft indicators in recommendation little d. Therefore, Bahrain finds indicator 1.4.1 and recommendation little c as sufficient to assess objective 1.4 of the CITES strategic vision. However, Bahrain also supports New Zealand, the US, and other parties' suggestion on having the additional indicators mentioned in little d to be refined and reviewed further. Thank you.
Thank you, Bahrain. I give the floor to Nigeria.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor. With regard to the recommendations in SC 77.16, we support the mapping exercise between the CITES strategic vision and the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, and thank the Secretariat for its work. The mapping makes it clear that CITES has a vital role to play in addressing the key drivers of the biodiversity crisis, but it will take renewed dedication and increased ambition on our part to make that happen. We also support the proposed amendments to RESCON 16.4 on cooperation of CITES with other biodiversity-related conventions, including the request for the Secretariat to provide relevant data collected on the CITES strategic vision indicators to the CBD Secretariat. Finally, we support in principle the addition of an indicator for CITES strategic vision objective 1.4 as proposed in recommendation D. However, the wording of proposed indicator 1.4.2 needs to be amended slightly to reflect the purpose of objective 1.4, which is to ensure that the CITES appendices reflect the conservation status and needs of all species, not just CITES listed species. The phrase listed in the appendices should come after the phrase identified as likely to be threatened by international trade on the basis of information in the IUCN Red List of threatened species, in bracket, that is, near threatened, vulnerable, endangered, critically endangered, extinct in the wild, and extinct. We also believe the indicator should make use of other relevant sources of information aside from the red list where necessary. So, the new proposed indicator 1.4.2 should read, the number and proportion of species identified as likely to be threatened by international trade on the basis of information the IUCN Red List of threatened species, that is, in bracket, near threatened, vulnerable, endangered, critically endangered, extinct in the wild, and extinct, in bracket, and other sources that are listed in the appendices. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Nigeria. I'm going to take a few more comments, but I want to do a summary of what I'm hearing on the floor. I'm hearing that there is agreement for recommendation C to submit that indicator to the COP. I do not hear a lot of support for recommendation D on the draft indicators as they're in the document and the need for further refinement. We have heard further refinement by the Standing Committee chair as well as the technical committees. And so I am seeing a lot of nods for that. So I think we have C and D kind of locked up and where the committee would like to go with that. In terms of recommendations A and B, there seems to be a little confusion, some comments on that. We can also include that in a notification to the parties if they'd like to, provide some input on the mapping. And all of this will be reported back out at SC 78 anyways. And so if there are additional comments on the floor that are different than what we have heard thus far, we can take those, but if it's more refinement of recommendation D or support for recommendation C or just comments on A and B, there'll be an opportunity to provide those either through the notification to the parties or further consultation with the technical committees and the Standing Committee chair. Okay, so I will give the floor to Mexico, and I open it for comments from observer organizations, but I will only be able to take one or two with a 1-minute time limit.
Gracias, señora.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be brief. With respect to Annex 1 and in agreement with the North America region speaker, we agree that 2.2 shows relation with D, and 3.5, the relation with goal 15. With respect to the resolution 16.4 and its amendment, we would point out that the Spanish version is referring to a previous strategic vision and the Aichi targets. So that has to be updated, at least in the Spanish version. And we will provide the Secretariat with a written version of our proposed amendments, but we think that this whole mapping exercise has been excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Mexico. I give the floor to the European Union, and I'm going to close the list.
Thank you very much. We, on recommendation A, we can support but recommend that in Annex 1, under Objective 1.1, the reference to Target 9 be removed, of Target 9 of the KMGBF. And then we would like to support the proposal by other parties to refer discussions on indicators also to Animals and Plants Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, European Union. I give the floor to Traffic.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Traffic welcomes the progress made in aligning the CITES strategic vision and the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. In this regard, Traffic would like to note the draft decision from CBD Substar 25 last month for consideration and adoption by CBD COP16, encouraging CBD parties to work together with partners, in particular through the Collaborative Partnership on Sustainable Wildlife Management, CPW, to develop indicators for monitoring the status of and trends in the use of wild species, taking into consideration the indicators of the monitoring framework. The CPW work plan also includes an activity to begin the process of creating clear and effective monitoring frameworks and indicators for the targets relevant to wildlife. We therefore hope work on this agenda can be fully aligned and coordinated with these efforts. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Traffic. Kenya, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Kenya would support the recommendations as contained, but considering that there is no much support on the recommendation C, we consider that the Kunming-Montreal GBF is a framework as it is, and in recognition of the need for the cooperation between CITES and other multilateral related conventions, other biodiversity-related conventions, considering that at the national level, we are expected to develop national targets. The issue of refining of the indicators can be covered within the NBSAPs of each country, but then at this point, what we need to do is create that synergy and the cooperation in implementation of the framework as it is. And of the targets identified that are core in the seeking that cooperation, we believe that the mapping, we consider that the mapping that has been done by the Secretariat is a useful step in getting the CITES parties, creating those synergies and the cooperation in the implementation of Kunming-Montreal GBF targets. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Kenya, I just want to clarify, you said that you weren't supportive of recommendation C of the indicator of it going forward to COP?
We consider that C can be covered outside this framework. That's what we are saying.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any more requests to speak, so I'm just going to summarize in the proposed way forward what I did provide a few speakers ago for to invite the Secretariat to send out a notification to the parties seeking comments on recommendation A and B in the document about the mapping exercise and further coordination with the global biodiversity framework. I did hear, with exception of the gentleman from Kenya, an overwhelming support for agreeing to recommendation C. So the committee agrees to recommendation C, and we'll have a revised recommendation D, which is inviting the Secretariat in collaboration with the technical committees to review and revise the draft indicators 1.42 and 1.43, taking also in consideration the comments made up on the floor, and report back to SC 78. Okay, agreement for that. So with that, I close this agenda item, and we will move forward to national reports 32. And so for this, we are going to do 32.3, followed by 32.1, and then 32.2. We're going to take them all together. One by one. And I just want to thank again the CBD Acting Executive Secretary for joining us today and providing such wonderful remarks. So for this first document, 32.3, there is no updates or provided that the Secretary has, so we're not going to do an introduction, and we can just hop right into comments on this document. And so I do open the floor to members of the Standing Committee. I open the floor to observer parties. I open the floor to observer organizations. Columbia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Macau Special Administrative Region of the People's Republic of China legislative status is still in Category 2. In 2017, Macau amended its legislation so as to fulfill all requirements set forth under CITES, and the legislative document was submitted
Representative from China, I believe you're on the wrong agenda item. We're on 32.3. Revised report format for implementation reports. We'll get to that one very shortly. I give the floor to Belgium.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On document 32.3, we support the recommendations. On paragraph 6 of the document and the question on whether the implementation report template can be sent through an online survey, through an exclusive link to each member state or each management authority. From our experience, it can be more time-consuming and burdensome to fill in a complex and extensive online document than to elaborate a document in Word, especially when the MA have to compile answers from scientific and enforcement authorities. So this difficulty may arise in other countries too, and so we suggest to keep the two options open for parties to respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Belgium. Opening the floor for observer parties. So the Standing Committee agrees to the recommendations in document 32.3 and notes the comment made by Belgium on the floor. With that, I conclude this agenda item, and we will move next to agenda item 32.1, submission of annual reports. And I give the floor to the Secretariat.
Thank you, Chair. And the Secretariat provides an update on document 32.1. Parties whose reports have been received since the document was published are Australia, Comoros, Egypt, Fiji, Georgia, Maldives, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Solomon Islands. Therefore, the Secretariat recommends that the Standing Committee, pursuant to Resolution Conf 11.17, and on the basis of the present report and the updated information received, instruct the Secretariat to issue notifications 60 days after the closure of the 77th meeting of the Standing Committee, recommending that parties not authorize any commercial trade in specimens of CITES-listed species with Angola, Antigua, Brunei Darussalam, Equatorial Guinea, Eritrea, the Gambia, Guinea, Myanmar, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Somalia, and Togo. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. I now open the floor to members of the Standing Committee. I give the floor to Japan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We basically agree with the logic of this document. At the same time, we are afraid of that sudden suspension of the trade may cause confusion of both exporting and importing countries. To minimize that confusion, we would like to ask Secretariat to make prior notification about the situation of each country, a prospective country, or warning to the parties about the suspension. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Japan. Any comments from observer parties? Comments from observer organizations? Okay, there seems to be no comments, and so for this one, the committee agrees to the recommendations in paragraph 9, taking into consideration the comments made by the representative from Japan and the additional information provided by the Secretariat during the introduction. And with that, I close this agenda item, and we move on to 32.2, revised guidelines for the preparation and submission of CITES annual reports and guidelines for the preparation and submission of CITES annual illegal trade reports. There's no new information from the Secretariat on this document, and so I open the floor to committee members for comments. The United Kingdom, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The UK supports the proposed amendments to the Illegal Trade Report Guidelines and the reporting template in SC 77.32.2. However, we have some queries over the proposed amendments to the trade term codes in the annual report and Legal Trade Report Guidelines. It is unclear how the proposed new trade term code threads differs from the existing trade term code fibre. Is the intention that thread refers to a spun or woven fibre, for example, wool products? Moving on to the trade term code hair and the additional animal species proposed to be added to the explanation, it is unclear to us when hair or fur trade term codes should be used for these species. We would therefore seek clarification on the proposed new trade term code thread and how this differs to the existing trade term code fibre, and clarification on the use of hair or fur so that it is clear which trade term code should be used. Thank you.
Thank you, United Kingdom. I give the floor to the United States.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the North America region. We support the proposed revisions to description codes in the table in paragraph 4 of the current document. However, we recommend the following language be added to the explanation column for clarity for both codes. First, for the THD thread code, to read thread dash a processed long strand of multiple hairs or fibers used in sewing, comma, weaving, comma, or knitting, comma. The rest remains the same. Second, for the HAI hair code, to read hair dash includes all unprocessed animal hair, comma, and then continuing with the species examples as listed. However, we recommend striking out the or after bear. Regarding the checkbox introduced in paragraph 9 of the current document, where parties can opt out of sharing their data with CITES, we are concerned that current proposed wording may be perceived by parties to indicate that checking no means that they have satisfied the reporting requirements to CITES. We recommend replacing the no checkbox text to read no, comma, data related to seizures of elephant specimens will be submitted to CITES as a separate report, period. We support all remaining amendments to the guidelines for both reports. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And so for that last edit, it would end after report and the remainder of the text would be struck out. Thank you. I may come back to you for the thread fiber thing. I give the floor now to, I open the floor to observer parties. Oh, Belgium.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We thank the Secretariat for the document and the UNODC for the suggestions, but we have also the following concerns. On paragraph 4, we agree with the UK that it's unclear the term, when we need to use the term thread instead of hair. We
hear the recommendations from the colleagues from the US, but we need some assessing if that would address our concerns. Regarding all the changes related to the submission of ivory seizure data, we also want to recall, as the colleagues from the US, that the existing reporting mechanisms and their respective reporting deadlines imposed on parties by the relevant reporting mechanisms and their reporting deadlines imposed on the parties, by the relevant resolutions is for CITES is on the 31st of March, and whereas the annual illegal trade report is on the 31st of October. And so we wonder if by recommending parties to submit their ivory seizure data to the annual illegal trade report instead of directly to CITES, they would fail to respect that deadline set out for CITES. We're also concerned that the resolution Conf 1010 and Conf 1117 may contradict each other with regard to the way the data can be shared between the existing systems. While it is clear that data can flow from the annual illegal trade report to CITES, it's not clear that the data sharing can go in the other direction, so from CITES to the annual illegal trade report. Furthermore, some data requirements might need to be adapted to ensure that the data can be used for CITES purposes and that no relevant information is lacking or counted twice. And so we also note in general the need to streamline reporting and limit the reporting burden. The more complex reporting becomes, the less accurate the data might get. So in light of the above, we would like to call for an intersessional working group to work on the issue with the view to propose at the COP solutions to address the contradicting and or ambiguous wording in the resolutions, keeping in mind the aim to reduce the reporting burden. Thank you.
Thank you, Belgium. I give the floor to Peru.
Gracias.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm referring to the question of thread and hair. We import and or export thread, and I'm referring here to vicuna. We have vicuna fiber, but we also have a product we call thread, which we do import with the FIL code, and we don't really have a description per se, and thread is not a part of the process. So we need this code in order to cover the product that we import. And we give the unit of kilos because thread is thicker and the quantities used are different. That's why you need to have a weight to show that you're talking about a product used in industry. We need this term in order to describe the product. We import from Italy, and we have a product that so far isn't properly described in our system, and that is why we need this new code. Thank you.
Thank you, Peru. I will give the floor to IWMC for a very brief intervention.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam. I would like to express my agreement with what has been just so well pointed out by Peru. So you have original thread. Now, I don't think that apart from spider, we don't really have very animals that produce thread. You're talking about products that are based on fiber. Now, here we have plant or animal, and then vicuna or guanaco. I think it might be preferable not to have two very closely related species, but rather to have an animal species and a plant species. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, IWMC. And so I want to focus on the Standing Committee now on what we heard. We have some amended proposed text from the United States about further clarifying the the two trade terms, the thread and hair, and the differences between those, as well as some amended text for the illegal trade report about sharing with CITES. And then we heard some comments from the representative from Belgium about a lot of this needing further intersessional discussion to make sure that we are not being contradictory in some of the resolutions, as well as how the functionality of cross-sharing of data between the legal trade report and CITES, does it go both ways or one way? And so I wanted to see what the committee thought about an intersessional working group to be able to discuss this and provide recommendations. There seems to be a lot of support for that. Okay, so I'm going to ask Belgium, can you assist me with a mandate for the working group based on your comments? Just give me 1 second. I have a draft mandate. I just want to make sure that it aligns with what you're actually seeking. Okay, so it's the mandate of the working group would be to review the provisions in Resolution Comp 1010, Rev Cop 19, paragraph 27G, and Resolution Comp 11.17, Rev Cop 19, paragraph 4, relating to exchange of information between the annual illegal trade report and CITES, as well as the data elements to be reported in both as it relates to elephant specimens. That sounds good? Okay. And then report back to SC 78. So we will do that first. And then in regards to the additional text by the United States, is there support for that additional text? I don't see any support for the amendment by the United States, so if I don't hear any support, I'm going to leave the text as it's listed in the document. Belgium.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the revisions of the US, we would be able to support them, so we want to extend that. And on the mandate of the working group, we had one small reflection. Given the agenda of SC 78, we would rather them to report back to COP. Yes, thank you.
They are saying that it's we're not able to do that. It has to go to the, yep. So the working group is not allowed to submit a document directly to COP. Parties can do that as well as the committee. And so it would have to come back to SC 78 if we wanted it to go to COP 20. It's going to be a big meeting. So where we are now is that we have the amendments by the United States, which I will have them read again. We have agreed to set up an intersessional working group, and the there is one other thing in recommendation 13. Does the Standing Committee agree to the amendments to the guidelines of the preparation and submission of the annual reports? Of the illegal trade reports, I'm sorry, like there's a lot of revisions there. Yep. They're okay. Okay, so we can agree to that. The United States, I'm going to call on you to just provide the text for the thread. I have the one for hair. And if you can just provide the additional text for thread, that would be excellent. Thank you.
Sure. For thread, it would read thread dash a processed long strand of multiple hairs or fibers used in sewing, comma, weaving, comma, or knitting, comma, and the rest remains the same.
So we have a thread, a processed long strand of multiple hairs of fiber of natural origin. The putting that clarifier on those three uses may limit the description because they could be used for other than sewing, knitting, and weaving, even though they're commonly used for those. So if we can strike out the actual uses and just add of natural fibers, of natural origin. So it would read, thread, a long processed strand of multiple hairs of fiber of natural origin. Multiple hairs of fiber of natural origin. And then we would have the examples, plant or animal origin, Vacuna guanaco. The United States.
We included long strand of multiple hairs or fibers. Okay, instead of fibers.
Okay, clarification, thank you. Thread, a processed long strand of multiple hairs or fibers of natural origin. And the rest remains the same. Yep. Okay, so we agree to that edit, and then for hair, it would be hair includes all unprocessed animal hair, e.g. of elephant, yak, guanaco, wolf, bear, panther, etc. Okay, so the committee agrees to those changes. And regarding your other edit, it will be taken up in the intersessional working group. And so we're going to establish the intersessional working group now. I'm going to propose that we limit it to parties as well as traffic, if they are interested in joining. So if you're interested, please turn your mic on so I can see the name of the party. I am also going to include the UNODC in this intersessional working group. And so as I call your name, please just take your mic off. I have the UNODC, the United States, Belgium, United Kingdom, Singapore, India, traffic, Austria, Canada, and Germany, Kuwait, Argentina, Italy. Do we have anyone interested in chairing this intersessional working group? Belgium? Yes, thank you so much. And Belgium will chair this intersessional working group. Peru, would you like to join the intersessional working group? Or would you like to? The UAE, would you like to join the intersessional working group? Okay, with that, I close this agenda item and we will move forward to agenda item number 31, national laws for the implementation of the convention. And I give the floor to the Secretariat.
Thank you, Chair. Concerning Doc SC 7731, the Secretariat wishes to present a few updates based on the most recent information transmitted by parties. With regard to paragraph 8 of the document, out of 184 parties, 112 parties are placed in category 1 and not 111. 44 parties are placed in category 2 and not 45. And then 25 are in category 3 and 3 are recent parties. The Secretariat acknowledges additional submissions made by Armenia, Bahrain, Belarus, Botswana, China for Macau Special Administrative Region, Ecuador, Kazakhstan, Kenya, Kyrgyzstan, Lao PDR, Mongolia, and Sri Lanka in the recent days. The Secretariat will review these submissions and revert to parties as soon as possible. With regard to paragraph 21, it is 43 and not 46 parties with legislation placed in category 2 or 3 that have not reported any progress, which is of concern. Turning to the recommendations, under recommendation A, in addition to India, Maldives, Pakistan, the territories of Bermuda and the British Virgin Islands, the legislation of the United Republic of Tanzania is also being placed in category 1. We therefore have 4 countries and 2 territories moving to category 1, and the Standing Committee is invited to comment them. On recommendation B, recommendation to all parties to suspend trade in all CITES listed species for commercial purposes with Comoros, Congo, Dominica, Ecuador, Libya, and Sierra Leone. The Standing Committee might note that Mongolia has been removed from this list as an update on national legislation with translation of relevant instruments was provided to the Secretariat on 1st November, and might also note the update on national legislation transmitted by Ecuador and published as informative document 36. On recommendation C, recommendation to request the Secretariat to issue formal warning or a second formal warning to parties for lack of reporting on legislative progress. The Standing Committee might want to note that Kyrgyzstan has been removed from this list since an update on national legislation, also with translation of relevant instruments, was provided to the Secretariat prior to the meeting. And also, although in receipt of a formal warning at SC 70, Sudan did report on national legislation up to 2020 and has been liaising with the Secretariat to address various questions regarding the implementation of the convention, taking into account the current security situation. For this reason, Sudan is not recommended for issuance of a second formal warning at this session of the Standing Committee. Recommendation D on the addition of Uganda to the list of parties designated by the Standing Committee as requiring its attention as a priority remains unchanged. Finally, the Standing Committee may note that this is in this document that the Secretariat also addressed Decision 19.62, paragraph E, and the question of the implementation of the Convention in the event of exceptional circumstances that impede the proper functioning of CITES at the national level. This is reflected under Recommendation E, and the recommendation remains unchanged. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat. And so I open the floor now to members of the Standing Committee for comments. Japan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to repeat the comment I made on 30.2.1 that we basically agree the logic of this document, but yeah, because of the to minimize the confusion of the sudden suspension, we would like to ask Secretariat to make prior notification or to the parties about the suspension. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Japan. I give the floor to Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a short information that I have contacted 3 countries from our region, particularly Azerbaijan, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and North Macedonia, and they have all 3 informed me that they have some progress on legislation, particularly Bosnia and Herzegovina. As they mentioned, they have developed draft legislation, which they are currently translating, and they will provide update to the Secretariat very soon. And all 3 are ready to cooperate with the Secretariat, and they will need some consultancy on this issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Georgia. I give the floor to Brazil.
Gracias, señora Presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor. Looking at the information document that Ecuador presented, I would like to hear from the delegation of Ecuador if they have anything else to add or further explanation to give so that we can decide on the best way forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. I now open the floor to observer parties. And I give the floor to Ecuador.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I'd like to thank the Secretariat for the update on the information that was we were able to send before the beginning of this meeting of the committee. Yes, indeed, as has been said by the Secretariat, there's updated information on the advances made, and that was included in an executive summary in English and Spanish in the document INF 36, where we provide an explanation on the progress, but also a very specific explanation of the case. In May, for the first time this year, we used a constitutional regulation before the elections and a suspension of the assembly, and that meant that we could not progress with the final part of the legislative work. And there's a timeline set out to complete the completion of the strengthening of the CITES-related legislation. So in addition to the information we've provided and this extra information, we would request that we be removed from the list of recommendation 38B from the Secretariat's document. Thank you.
Thank you, Ecuador. I give the floor to India.
Thank you, Madam Chair. India welcomes the recommendation of the Secretariat for inclusion of India in Category 1 with respect to the national legislation. We would like to highlight that Indian legislation equates the species listed in Appendix 1 with those included in Schedule 1 of the Act, and thereby providing imprisonment term in case of contraventions involving the specimen of these species. Further, we have also authorized the Coast Guards to enter, search, arrest, and detain if there are reasonable grounds for believing that any person has committed an offense against the provisions of CITES. However, we note that India, though included in Category 1, is still being reflected in Table 1 titled Parties, except recently acceded parties with legislation in Category 2 or 3, though both the Annex 1 to the SC 77 Doc 31 and the Table 1 referred in the document were updated by the Secretariat in August 2023. Further, as suggested by India during discussion on the work program, we still propose that this agenda should be discussed on the first day as national legislation is an important compliance matter of CITES. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, India. I give the floor to Tanzania.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tanzania takes note of the recommendation by the Secretariat presented in paragraph 38 of the present document regarding measures to be taken to ensure effective implementation of the present convention. Further, Tanzania wishes to express its appreciation to CITES Secretariat, particularly the Secretary General, Madam Yvonne Herrero, and the staff from the legal unit for their support and guidance that has enabled United Republic of Tanzania to fulfill all requirements for compliance with the CITES. And today it has been announced that we have been moved to Category 1 after 43 years of after entered into force the convention in Tanzania. Tanzania will endeavor to review its legislation where appropriate to strengthen control and ensure sustainable utilization of flora and fauna and fully compliance to the provision of the present convention. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Tanzania. I'm going to close the list, and I give the floor to Colombia. Okay. Why are they doing?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Macau Special Administration, from China, just to Colombia. That's right? Okay.
Yeah, I think the mapping is off. I give the floor to China.
Okay. The Macau Special Administrative Region of People's Republic of China's legislative status is still in Category 2. But in 2017, Macau amended its legislation so as to fulfill all requirements set forth under CITES, and the legislative document was submitted to the Secretariat. And at the same time, appendix updated over the years have also been published in the Macau SAR's official gazette accordingly. Clarifications to queries received recently have been delivered to Secretariat. We look forward to the Secretariat review Macau SAR's legislative status in timely manner. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, China. I give the floor to the United States.
这个要按一下吗？
Thank you, Madam Chair. Speaking on behalf of the United States, we congratulate India, the Maldives, Pakistan, the United Republic of Tanzania, Bermuda, and the British Virgin Islands for their tremendous efforts leading to their legislation being placed in Category 1. The United States believes that the effectiveness of CITES is significantly undermined when parties do not have adequate national laws in place, and we consider the national legislation project to be critically important for achieving effective implementation of CITES. With regard to Recommendation B, the United States supports the Secretariat's recommendation in paragraph 38, including the recommendation to adopt a recommended trade suspension in CITES listed species with the Comoros, Congo, Dominica, Libya, and Sierra Leone. Noting the comments made here, we support the removal of Mongolia and Ecuador from this list of parties. We note that the several parties in this list have been party to the convention for at least 20 years, and in the case of some of them, as long as 40 years. Based on the lack of progress by these parties, including in response to formal warnings and requests for information, there is no evidence to suggest that they are adequately controlling or regulating any trade in CITES species. Although the recommendations adopted in response to document Doc SC 77, Doc 32.1, just here this morning, were for commercial trade, we note that there are existing recommendations to suspend trade due to failure to submit CITES annual reports for suspension of all CITES trade, not just commercial, in recognition of the fact that this is a serious problem with implementation of the convention. We do not consider the failure to adopt adequate measures to implement the convention as any less serious a problem with implementation than failure to submit annual reports. Therefore, we believe the recommended trade suspension should be for all trade in CITES listed species, not merely limited to commercial trade. We note that the legislative table in the annex to document SC 77, Doc 31, indicates that the last update from Oman was in August of 2023. However, in paragraph 16 of this document, the Secretariat notes that the written update from Oman in July of 2023, indicating that a final draft of the legislation had been reviewed and approved by the National Legal Authority and was in process of getting the necessary approvals, was identical to the previous update provided to the Secretariat in 2020. The Secretariat further notes that no progress seems to have been accomplished, and the Secretariat has not received the updated timeline. Given the lack of legislative progress by Oman in adopting appropriate measures for the effective implementation of CITES and providing an accurate update on its progress, and in light of the fact that it has already received 2 formal warnings, the United States believes that Oman should be included among the parties subject to a recommended trade suspension. Finally, we note the U.S. support for the remaining recommendations, recommendations C, D, and E. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, United States. I give the floor to Uganda.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, Uganda takes note of the observations and comments made by the Secretariat. We wish to report that Uganda has made significant and steady progress with regards to the development of the relevant laws and regulations to implement the convention. Like the Secretariat has reported, Madam Chair, Uganda has developed an enabling legislation adopted by Parliament in 2019. And this very law provides for numerous provisions to implement the convention, including very highly stringent penalties for wildlife crimes, including life imprisonment. Madam Chair, to operationalize the various provisions of the Act, Uganda has developed the draft wildlife trade regulations. The draft was shared with the Secretariat, and in 2022, the Secretariat provided very important comments that have since been incorporated in our draft. Recently, about 3 weeks ago, the draft was presented to the ministry's top policy management organ chaired by the minister himself. And we generated more comments, and we've since submitted our draft to the Attorney General's office for final drafting and subsequent endorsement and approval by the Honorable Minister. Madam Chair, we remain committed and actively involved in implementing the various measures, including surveillance, intelligence, and investigations to ensure that we prosecute and arrest the wildlife criminals. Uganda remains among the few African countries that have embraced the electronic application and permitting system, and this has helped us to improve on the monitoring and the regulation, but also the permitting processes. We strongly believe that the current legislation and the draft regulations generally meet the requirements for domestication of the convention. Going forward, Uganda will continue to update the Secretariat on the progress made. Our desire is to migrate and shift to Category 1.
Uganda, you have gone over.
So we thank you, and we will continue to work with the Secretary to ensure that we enforce.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to close the list now, and I'm going to ask folks, please respect the 2-minute intervention for observer parties and 1 minute for observer organizations. This timing is going to allow us to complete the intervention, to complete the agenda. And so I really urge us to stick to that and keep our intervention short. And so I'm going to give the floor to Bahrain.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be concise. The Kingdom of Bahrain would like to first express its gratitude to the Secretariat for conducting a comprehensive analysis of the national law and providing a summary of Bahrain's progress moving from Category 3 to Category 2, and the current need for Bahrain's clarification of certain queries raised by the Secretariat before a possible Category 1 status. Bahrain would like to formally acknowledge, for the record, that a response has recently been sent to address these queries. Upon reviewing the analysis provided by the Secretariat, it has come to light that many of the issues were a result of a direct translation error between the Arabic and English versions. In conclusion, Bahrain appreciates the Secretariat's review and observations. The process of providing corrected translations is currently underway and will be shared with the Secretariat once completed. Thank you.
Thank you, Bahrain. I give the floor to Zambia. Okay, I guess Zambia no longer wants the floor.
Thank you, Chair. We do want the floor. Thank you so much, Chair, and we would want to appreciate the Secretariat for the work done and the comment provided to Zambia. Zambia notes that having updated the Secretariat on our legislation, we did receive comments from the Secretariat, which we do appreciate, and would want to let you know that indeed we are committed, as we are reviewing our Zambia Wildlife Act, we are committed to ensure that the feedback given is taken into consideration and our laws will be aligned in order for us to be able to fully implement the CITES Convention. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Oman. I give the floor to Kenya.
Thank you, Chair. We thank the Secretariat for the analysis of the national laws as presented in Doc 31. And for a quick update, we just need to indicate that Kenya has consistently communicated with the Secretariat to provide an update, including the last one being November last year. And in that communication, we had said that we are in the process of getting our Parliament approve amendments to a section in the Act to designate the CITES authorities, being the only item out of the 4 requirements of CITES legislation to be fulfilled. And in the recent update we have given us at 2nd November, before coming to this meeting, that process is ongoing. And we believe that very soon we should be providing that the enactment of the amendments and the presentation to the Secretariat. And we ask that it should be noted that it is confirmed that it's only one item out of the 4 requirements of fulfilling the CITES requirements, that which is designation of the authorities. And it's not that the authorities are not there. They are already there. The institutions are there. It's a matter of just submitting those amendments, and we believe in the next assessment, even before we get the first formal warning, it will not be coming. I believe it should be, we should fulfill those requirements. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Kenya. I give the floor to Brazil.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam. I shall be very brief. In the light of the information we've had from Ecuador, what we've heard now and what we have in INFDOC 31, I would suggest that Ecuador be excluded from B. Thank you.
Brazil, I give the floor to Oman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Oman, take note to document 31. And Oman is just to explain our situation for the national law. Oman has proceeded its draft of its national legislation, and it's under process, and we expect within the coming month to be finalized. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for the update, Oman. And I give the floor to Conservation Force.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to refer to point 12, letter C of this document, because I happened to be in Botswana, Madam Chair, last August, and the newspapers were rejoining the fact that the Botswana Parliament has approved the new wildlife bill. So, and that this bill, according to these newspapers, was completely fulfilling the requirements of CITES. So I wonder, Madam Chair, if paragraph 12, letter C, is correct and it reflects the reality. Thank you for having the Secretariat probably respond to my question. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I give the floor to Argentina, and I'm closing the list.
Gracias.
Thank you, Madam. Like Brazil, we, having heard from Ecuador, we do think that they are fulfilling their obligations, and we would like to have them deleted from 38B. Thank you, Madam.
And lastly, I give the floor to the gentleman from the Dominican Republic.
Gracias.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We also would support Ecuador's name being stricken from 38B.
And I would give the floor lastly to the FAO.
Thank you, Madam Chair. FAO would like to thank the Secretariat for the continued partnership with FAO, which has led to important activities jointly held this year, including the regional workshop on CITES fisheries and legal acquisition findings hosted by the government of Ecuador, as well as other collaborations reported in Doc 31. FAO is pleased to inform that the second edition of the Study and Guide for Implementing CITES through National Fisheries Legal Frameworks has been published in both English and Spanish and will soon be available in French as well on FAO and CITES websites. The second edition provides updated information on the interactions and synergies between CITES and fisheries regimes based on the outcomes of COP19. FAO looks forward to strengthening the partnership with the Secretariat and welcome interested partners to this collaboration in assisting FAO member states that are parties to CITES in strengthening national legislation for better implementation of the Convention. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, FAO. And so I'm going to summarize now with a quick point regarding the question we had for Conservation Force, but I would invite Botswana, if they have questions regarding the accuracy of the document, to follow up with the Secretariat. And so looking at the recommendations in the document, I hear strong support and congratulations for recommendation A, that we can agree on that, and commend India, Maldives, Pakistan, Bermuda, the British Virgin Islands, and Tanzania, on achieving Category 1 status. So agreeing upon that recommendation, and congratulations. Okay, so to take up recommendation B, we had a few edits proposed by the delegate from the United States, and so I'd like to get the Standing Committee's thoughts on those. We've also had support from Brazil as well as the gentleman from the Dominican Republic regarding Ecuador. And so what is on the table is to insert in B, recommendation B, to remove Ecuador. We had a revision from the Secretariat for the removal of Mongolia and the insertion of Oman. Is there support for all of those recommendations? Okay, so recommendation B will read, the Standing Committee agrees on the recommendations to all parties to suspend trade in all CITES listed species for commercial purposes with Comoros, Congo, Dominica, Oman, Libya, and Sierra Leone. And the rest of the recommendation remains as it's in the document. I give the floor to Belgium.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We would want to have some clarification from the Secretariat into whether they already reviewed the INVDOC that Ecuador has provided, and that they also agree to remove Ecuador from the list, as that has not been clear for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Belgium. I give the floor to the Secretariat.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the questions. Yes, we have reviewed the information received yesterday prior to the publication, and the Secretariat would agree with the removal, noting that the responsibility of the adoption of the final laws remains with the country concerned. Thank you.
With that, is the committee in agreement? Thank you. With recommendation C, is there agreement? We have agreement on the recommendation as amended by the Secretariat to remove Kyrgyzstan from the list. Recommendation D, agreement on recommendation D as outlined in the document. Agreement on recommendation E as outlined in the document. And recommendation 39, the Standing Committee recognizes and welcomes the support provided by parties, development partners, as well as intergovernmental and non-governmental organizations in support of the development and adoption of national measures to effectively implement and enforce the convention. Okay, so we also agree on 39. And I'll note all the comments that were made on the floor. And with that, I conclude this agenda item, and we will move to next up. Next up is agenda item 18, cooperation with MEAs and other IGOs, and I'll give it to the Secretariat for a short intro.
UNIP? That's UNIP. IGO, okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This document addresses decisions 17.55 and 56, RepCop 19, as well as decision 1920. I will just give you a few updates and not introduce the entire document for the sake of time. And the two updates regard the two upcoming opportunity for representing CITES and strengthen synergies with other multilateral environmental agreements and the United Nations Environment Programme. So just to focus on those two, first, the Bern 3 conference on synergies is scheduled to be held in Bern in January 2024. And CITES will be represented by 5 members of the Standing Committee: Indonesia, Kenya, Zambia, Israel, and Cuba. And hopefully there will be an opportunity to nominate a few more members to ensure that all regions that wishes to be there can have a space in the conference. For now, those 5 have been nominated, and hopefully there will be more seats available for CITES at a later stage. So that's the burn 3. The second thing I wanted to just highlight is the United Nations Environment Assembly, the 6th assemblies that will be held in Nairobi from 26 February to 1st March of next year. So it's 26 February, not the 21st, as I indicated in the document. On the 28th of February, there will be 2 MEA high-level leadership dialogues on the following themes, and these are particularly focused on the multilateral environmental agreements. And the themes are strengthening the science policy interface for effective implementation on environmental commitments. That's the first roundtable. And the second is strengthening cooperation between UNEA, UNEP, and MEAs to enhance effective implementation at the national level, including on means of implementation. I should also like to note that it is expected that the African group will be tabling a resolution on cooperation with MEAs at the UNEA 6. As soon as we have that draft resolution, as soon as it's made available, we will make it available to you through a notification to the parties. And the Standing Committee is invited to consider the recommendations in paragraph 36. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. And I open the floor now to members of the Standing Committee. I open the floor to observer parties. I give the floor to the United States.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The United States supports the recommendations and appreciates that collaboration among the secretariats of various conventions can also be useful. We wish to ensure continued cooperation with other biodiversity-related conventions while minimizing the extent to which such coordination overextends the Secretariat's resources or could lead to activities that go beyond the scope and mandate of each convention. We also caution that it is important to ensure that CITES' level of engagement on these activities is commensurate to the benefits of our convention and believe that the leveraging of synergies at the national level is where parties can be most effective and efficient. Thank you.
Thank you, United States. I open the floor to observer organizations and give the floor to Canada.
Thank you, Chair. Canada is broadly supportive of the proposed approach to develop a partnership strategy as outlined in document 18. And we would welcome additional information from the Secretariat on their next step in due course. From our perspective, further developing a broad mapping of the current partnerships as outlined in paragraph 8 of document 18 is a first key step. This will be a valuable exercise to ensure that there's no duplication of work. We look forward to the ongoing work on this issue, including consultation with parties. And finally, regarding the Burn 3 conference, we hope that the conference will bring about fruitful discussion leading to concrete outcome to halt and reverse biodiversity loss. Thank you.
Thank you, Canada. I give the floor briefly to IWMC for a brief intervention.
Thank you, Chair. IWMC strongly support the interaction, cooperation, and collaboration between international bodies related to biodiversity. This cooperation is essential to the sustainable use and conservation of the environment and of the biodiversity, which is crucial in order to achieve our common goal. But we caution parties not to overstep CITES boundaries and to place their focus on what they have signed for within this body, taking into account, of course, the approach pushed by IPBES IPBES, advocating transformating governance in order to address and eventually beat biodiversity loss. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, IWMC. And so back to the Standing Committee. I don't have any more comments. It seems like there's agreement for the recommendations in document 18. And so I propose that the Standing Committee notes the process outlined in the development of the draft CITES partnership strategy and invites the Secretariat to take into account the comments and input that was provided on the floor. And B, agrees to coordinate the participation of its members at the Bern 3 Conference on Synergies to ensure that the convention and its interests are adequately represented at the conference. And C, encourages parties participating in UNIA high-level dialogues to represent the achievements, needs, and interests of CITES and its parties. And I will note all the comments made on the floor. With that, I close this agenda item, and we will move to agenda item 19, cooperation with IPBES. And I give I don't believe there's any. Nope, there's no updates from the Secretariat, so I can open the floor to comments from members of the Standing Committee. It appears the screen's a little bit behind. We're on document 19. Cooperation with IPBES. Seeing no comments from members of the Standing Committee, I give the floor to observer parties. I give the floor to China.
Thank you, Chair. I will be brief. To facilitate its review of the IPBES thematic assessment report on the sustainable use of wild species through its SPM, China supports establishing an intersessional working group by the Standing Committee under the draft terms of references. If feasible, China is willing to become a member. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, China. I open the floor to observer organizations. I give the floor to Conservation Force for a brief 1-minute intervention.
1 minute. The Conservation Force would also like to be a member of that working group if one is established. Thank you.
Thank you. And so going back to the committee, I didn't hear any comments. Is there support for the recommendations in paragraph 10? They're calling for the Standing Committee to establish an intersessional working group to facilitate the review of the IPBES thematic assessment report on the sustainable use of wild species. Is there support for this intersessional working group? I'm going to need to hear some support, audible support. I have been using silence as consensus this whole meeting, and so I'm going to move forward with using silence as consensus, and that the Standing Committee agrees to establishing this intersessional working group and agrees also to recommendation B to use paragraph 9 as the draft terms of reference for the working group. Okay, so the Standing Committee agrees to the recommendations in document 19, paragraph 10, and I will note the comments on the floor and establish the working group. So if you'd like to be part of this working group, can you please turn your mic on or indicate that you'd like to speak so I can get the name on the screen? Okay, so we have a lot. We have a lot now. Can you clear the screen, please?
No.
Can you please clear the screen? So we only can see 15, and we had a bunch, and so I'm going to start with the parties first, if a party would like to be part of this intersessional working group, and then we'll add the observer organizations next. So parties, please indicate whether or not you'd like to be in the intersessional working group by hitting your mic. So as I call your name, please take your mic off so that we can have more people join. The United States, Republic of Korea, South Africa, Canada, Australia, India, Switzerland, Tanzania, China, Japan, Indonesia, Zimbabwe, Poland, Zambia, and Kenya. Thank you. And now for observer organizations, if you'd like to be part of the working group, please turn your mic on. Okay, as I call out your organization, please take your mic off. So I have WCS, FAO, SSN, WWF, Traffic, IWMC, International Fur Federation, Animal Welfare Institute, South African Taxidermy and Tannery Association, Conservation Force, Wildlife Ranch SA, International Fund for Animal Welfare, Sustainable Use Coalition South Africa, and Professional Hunters South Africa. And I'm going to see if maybe Switzerland can chair this intersessional working group, since I believe Switzerland is also chairing the one for the Animals Committee. I give the floor to Switzerland.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we would be willing to do that. So to make sure we don't have overlap, I think it fits well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Switzerland. And with that, I conclude this. I'll note all the comments made on the floor, which was few, and I will conclude this agenda item. And we will move on to agenda item 17, role of CITES in reducing risk of future zoonotic disease emergence associated with international wildlife trade. And we're going to take up document 17.1 first, the report of the working group. And so we're not going to do an introduction or update on this document, and we can just hop in for comments. And so I first take comments from Members of the Standing Committee? I give the floor to the United States. This is for document 17.1, report of the working group.
I'll pause and wait till 17.2. My apologies.
Any comments on 17.1, the report of the working group? So with no comments on this document, the committee agrees to note the recommendations in paragraph 19, to note this as an interim report of the working group. With that, I close this agenda item and we will move on to 17.2, the report of the Secretariat. I first open the floor to members of the Standing Committee for comments. I give the floor to the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to the Secretariat and to the working group. We think that it's important that we identify areas where CITES can take action to prevent the emergence and transmission of zoonotic diseases. In this respect, we draw your attention to the report in Information Document 34. This focuses on taxa associated with zoonotic diseases considered to pose the greatest risk to human health, plus an analysis of the prevalence of CITES-listed species associated with high-risk diseases in illegal wildlife trade. We welcome the draft Memorandum of Understanding and draft joint programme of work with the World Organization for Animal Health. In relation to Section 1 of the MOU on mutual consultation and cooperation, we think that a further significant element is missing and should be included, referring to cooperation on identifying zoonotic disease risks specific to CITES activities and CITES-listed species. Thank you, Chair.
Can you just repeat that last part about the MOU?
Yes, so in Section 1, which relates to mutual consultation and cooperation, we think we should add something on cooperation on identifying zoonotic disease risks specific to CITES activities and CITES-listed species.
Thank you, United Kingdom. I give the floor to the United States.
Thank you, Chair. I am speaking on behalf of the North America region. We are pleased to see this progress on the partnership with WOA, and we have several suggested changes for the draft joint program of work and for the MOU. It may be useful to consider for this item as well a notification to the parties process to collect more detailed feedback. But for now, we will highlight only our substantial suggestions, and we have two regarding the draft joint program of work. And we hope these proposed changes can advance the WOA and CITES partnership beyond just collaboration in general, but to, quote, identify effective and practical solutions for reducing pathogen risk, as is written in Decision 19.15. Our first suggestion is that WOA and CITES also exchange information on specific diseases of interest, which may make steps more tangible looking forward. And so we would add text to the draft joint program of work, and it would say, exchange information between WOA and CITES on the specific wildlife diseases and their common wildlife host species or specimen types that could be of mutual interest. And to comment on that, we think this could include discussions on the wild species that are frequently in CITES trade and to explore the extent to which those are host to WOA notifiable diseases. There are over 120 animal diseases officially tracked by WOA, as well as 50 wildlife diseases that are noted by WOA online. So we think that that specific exchange would be useful and is similar in scope to what the UK suggested, but that's for the MOU.
One second, United States, just to get the rest of that, common wildlife host species or wildlife types that are?
They're common wildlife host species or specimen types that would be of mutual interest. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we have one more suggestion. We also think CITES would benefit from a shared understanding of veterinary certificates. We understand that their use by parties varies and that they don't follow a standard set of requirements. So on page 2 of the table regarding CITES permits and veterinary certificates, we suggest adding text that would say, CITES Secretariat will request that parties, in collaboration with WOA national focal points, share any protocols or national requirements for veterinary certificates. We also have a handful of smaller edits to the MOU for consideration, but we won't try to flag all of those in detail now. We can provide a document for the Secretariat's consideration on those minor points. Just one thing to highlight, which is that we think the 2015 instrument between CITES and WOA is technically called a cooperation agreement rather than a 2015 MOU, so we just wanted to make that change. And we're very pleased to see this progress and appreciate the chance to provide feedback. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, United States. I open the floor now to observer parties and observer organizations. I give the floor to Belgium.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We agree to the requests for changes made by the UK, and the first element of change suggested by the US on exchanging information between WOA and CITES on common wildlife host species or specimen types that would be of mutual interest. We also think, like the US, that it's a good idea to have a notification out to gather more information. With regards to the second request for change by the North American region, we question whether or not this is really something for CITES parties to do, because the veterinary certificates and the veterinary legislation is in fact not something that is within the scope of CITES management authorities to work on. So at this point in time, we do not agree to that addition. Thank you.
I give the floor to Chad.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The workshop on biodiversity and pandemics recognises that there's a rapid increase in the risk of pandemics, and that these are part of the factors that can contribute to pandemics. So trade in wildlife species can contribute, and it's important that CITES works on the issues. So we welcome the document SC 77 Doc 17.2 and the draft of the Memorandum of Understanding with the World Animal Health Organization, and we consider that the prevention of pathogen spillover is important, and we need to work on the suggestions in the Memorandum of Understanding. in the prevention of pandemics, it's essential that we prevent pathogen spillover because new pathogens can emerge from nature and from wildlife. So we need to continue working on the subject and ensuring that regulations are in place to be as efficient as possible in protecting public health. We must ensure that measures are taken before pathogens can be propagated. And we have to take a precautionary approach in the face of risks and consider the drivers of epidemics. The Memorandum of Understanding should also highlight the need to assist communities with changing traditional practices. Thank you.
We have a lot of interest in this agenda item, and so please, folks, I want to focus on the recommendations, specifically what we would like to have finalized here, which is the MOU between the CITES Secretariat and WOA. And so I'm going to close the list and take brief interventions, starting with Japan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We just support the comment made by Belgium a few minutes ago. We question the issue of animal health zoonotic diseases within the mandate of CITES. We also think the possible establishment of advisory body should be subject to the availability of resources by using external funding. Thank you.
I give the floor to Gabon.
Merci, Madame la... Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor. I will be brief. We would just like to support the amendment proposed by Chad when they made their statement. That is to say, they proposed including the prevention of the propagation of pathogenic agents for the agreement of Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the MOU. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabon. I give the floor to CMS.
Thank you. CMS appreciates the work done by CITES on zoonotic disease and remains willing to strengthen cooperation on these important issues. I would note that the work by CMS is broader, not only focusing on zoonoses, but on all disease which may affect animal population status and are relevant for conservation. There's a study on animal health that's being finalized, will be presented to CMS COP14. And also CMS has established a working group on migratory species and health under the CMS Scientific Council. The group would provide a mechanism to increase attention on these issues and advise parties on the risk of pathogen spillover, future outbreaks, pandemics, and also responding to wildlife disease and diseases of zoonotic origin. Thank you.
Thank you, CMS. I will give the floor to WCS.
Thank you, Chair. And I'll send you a list of those NGO observers that have signed on to this. Regarding document 17.2, we support the adoption of an MOU and joint program of work. We recommend specifically that action track 6, item 6.1.6 be for your consideration be deleted. We think there's enough else to do here, but development of wildlife-based economies at the national level is really beyond the remit of the CITES Secretariat. To the U.S. suggestion of including wildlife diseases, we respectfully submit to include pathogens rather than diseases because there are many wildlife species, such as bats, that carry significant pathogens that have risk, but not necessarily evidence of disease. The document uses the phrase safe, traceable, and legal. We suggest inclusion of sustainability, and we also suggest that the program of work include, quote, efforts designed to prevent pathogen spillovers. Finally, we thank the government of Germany for submission of information document 30 on behalf of members of the International Alliance Against Health Risks and Wildlife Trade. Whilst we have no time to discuss that, Alliance members are present here today if anyone has any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, WCS. I give the floor to Traffic for a brief 1-minute intervention.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. Traffic is confident that the Secretariat's collaboration with the World Secretariat under the MOU and Program of Work, together with the Secretariat's engagement with other One Health quadripartite members, will ensure sufficient technical and strategic advice on wildlife trade to global efforts to address zoonotic disease risk. Noting the commendable progress at the international level that has been made, we would like to stress that the most effective interventions to reduce zoonotic disease risk from wild animal trade are likely to be within national boundaries prior to export, whether for wild or captive production systems. Traffic therefore urges parties to effectively implement and strengthen multi-sectoral coordination as part of an integrated risk management approach to wild animal trade, ensuring that trade is legal, sustainable, traceable, and safe. And Traffic stands ready to provide any support if needed, including through its work with members of the Collaborative Partnership on Sustainable Wildlife Management, CPW. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Traffic. A brief intervention from Born Free.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of 11 observer organisations, and the list has been sent to the Secretariat. Given only 19 parties responded to notification 2023-028, we urge the Standing Committee to encourage further feedback. We encourage the Standing Committee to endorse the revised MOU with WOA in Annex 2A with a addition to Article 2, Paragraph 1 of Prevention of Pathogen Spillover and Disease Transmission, as proposed by Chad and Gabon and supported by WCS. CITES has a key role in identifying and addressing zoonotic risks associated with international wildlife trade in CITES-listed species. With regards to the proposed programme of work, Action Track 6, Section 6.16 should be deleted as suggested by WCS, or reworded to ensure wildlife trade activities are legal, ecologically sustainable and safe to better reflect the mandate of CITES. Thank you.
Lastly, I give the floor to IFF for a brief intervention.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I apologize for my voice. The IFF would concur with the comments made by Traffic, and we feel that the breadth of wildlife diseases is far beyond the mandate of CITES, and CITES can best engage through things like the MOU with WOA. Thank you.
Thank you, IFF. And so just talking to the Standing Committee now, we had some comments. There was support for some comments. There was not support for other comments. And so the ones I heard that had the most support for, I'd like to bring those to you now to see if this is something that we can agree upon. I will also flag that this document was brought to SC 74 for comments by the Standing Committee, and so it's being brought back here to SC 77, and we're having additional comments, and it is desire of the Secretariat, as stated in their recommendation, to finalize this MOU so that they can begin this joint program of work with WOA. And so, if we can come to agreement today on some of these more substantive comments and can agree to the recommendations, and then the Secretariat is going to have all of the comments that were made on the floor that also can be taken into consideration as they finalize the document. And so the comments I want to bring forward is added in MOU Article 2, Section 1, which would be identifying zoonotic disease risks associated with CITES activities and CITES listed species and prevention of pathogen spillover as an addition under Article 2, mutual consultation and cooperation. Is there support for the addition of that? Yep. I will read it again. And so it's an addition to Article 2 under mutual consultation and cooperation. In Section 1, it would be identifying zoonotic disease risk associated with CITES activities and CITES listed species and prevention of pathogen spillover. And I believe that addresses some of the concerns and comments we heard on the floor. I'm seeing some support for that addition. I will give folks a minute. Okay, I'm seeing some support from some of the members. No? Belgium?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I hope I understood it correctly, in the sense that you tried to put both UK's and Chad's suggestions together in one sentence. We would agree to the first half of the sentence, so that would be the UK's addition, but we have some reservation with regards to the second part. While we understand and support this idea on pathogen spillover, as far as the mandate and scope of CITES is concerned, and also mindful of the workload of CITES parties, we feel in a way that it's already covered to a certain extent already in the first bullet point, which is safe, traceable and legal international trade of wildlife. So we would prefer to just have this addition as suggested by the UK without the second part of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Belgium. Chad, a brief intervention if you have one.
Voilà, merci beaucoup. C'était tout simple.
Thank you very much. It was just to say that we should take into account not only pathogen, but also disease transmission. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm not hearing support for that, but I do hear some support for the first part of identifying zoonotic disease risks with CITES activities and CITES listed species as an addition to under mutual cooperation. Yes. Okay. So the committee can agree to that addition, and then the second addition is proposed by the United States for the joint program of work, and this one is to exchange information between WOA and CITES on specific wildlife disease and their common wildlife host and specimens types that could be of mutual interest. The United States.
Thank you, Chair. We would also, with that change, be willing to support WCS's suggestion, which we thought was helpful in changing diseases to pathogens. Thank you.
So it would be exchange of information between WOA and CITES on the specific wildlife pathogens and their common wildlife host species and specimen types that could be of mutual interest. Is there support for insertion of that into the joint program of work? Yes. So the committee is going to agree to that insertion in the joint program of work. And Okay, so with those two additions, the Standing Committee is going to invite the Secretariat to finalize the draft Memorandum of Understanding and draft Joint Program of Work with the World Organization for Animal Health contained in Annex 2A and 2B with the additions just agreed upon by the committee on the floor in its finalization with WOA, as well as take into consideration the other comments that we've had on the floor. United States.
Thank you, Chair, and appreciate your patience with our suggestions. We did have some minor changes to the MAU, and it has to do with terms like shall and agreed, and I wonder what opportunity we might have to provide those small suggestions. Thank you.
I would suggest and invite the United States to send those minor editorial comments to the Secretariat for consideration as they finalize this MOU. Okay, with that, I close this agenda item. Oh, wait, we have one more, sorry. There's one more recommendation, recommendation B. And so that is the Standing Committee request the Standing Committee's Intersessional Working Group to consider the information provided by the parties, the CMS Secretariat, organizations, and the United Nations Environment Program referred to in document SC 77, document 17.2, and its annexes. So this will be for the Intersessional Working Group on this to consider the information in the document. The Chair of Singapore has agreed with this recommendation, and so I don't hear any opposition from the Standing Committee. So we'll also agree to recommendation B. And with that, I close this agenda item, and we move on to the next one, which is next up in the agenda, we have document 20, document 22, and document 26. That would be the World Wildlife Trade Report, Language Strategy, and the CITES Gender Action Plan, respectively. And we agreed this morning, since these documents are for noting, that this committee agrees to note these documents and requests that the Secretariat send a notification to the parties to seek input and comments on the information provided in these documents, and that was agreed upon this morning. And so I'm going to skip over these three, and we will go to the next item, which is 28, engagement of Indigenous people and local communities. And we have the first document, which is 28, report of the working group. I will give the floor briefly to Canada to give a couple of statements about this document. Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The document is an interim report of our working group. It particularly reports on some of the discussions we had in Peru. We do want to give our thanks to Peru for generously hosting the first meeting of this working group, where we considered guidelines for engaging Indigenous peoples as well as local communities and rural communities in CITES processes. The chair is in the process of taking the information from the discussion in Peru to provide a first draft of those guidelines, and that, I believe, it speaks to part of our mandate. And we are considering as well the second part of our mandate, which is different approaches for further enhancing the engagement of Indigenous peoples, local communities. So I would invite the Standing Committee to take note of the document, and if parties who are not members of the working group have any additional observations, I would invite those to be sent to myself as chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Canada, and thank you for Peru for hosting that meeting. I open the floor to members of the Standing Committee for comments. I give the floor to Poland.
Yep.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We'd like to thank the Working Group Chair Canada and its member states for their efforts, and especially we thank Peru for hosting the joint meeting. We take note of the report and are convinced that engagement of indigenous peoples and local communities is an important topic that needs our attention. At the same time, we have to make sure that we find a suitable mechanism for better engagement without creating unwanted obstacles to listing proposals which could be detrimental for species conservation. Finally, we look forward to reviewing the working group recommendations at SC78. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Poland. I give the floor to New Zealand.
Thank you, Chair. Oceania welcomes the report of the working group and the development of the guidance on engagement with Indigenous peoples and local communities by the working group. We hear it was a very fruitful workshop in Peru. Oceania has one brief recommendation to contribute. We welcome at paragraph 8 the proposed evaluation of ideas for engagement of Indigenous peoples and local communities at the international level, with the intention of reporting a short list to Standing Committee 78. At COP19, the Secretariat provided the extremely useful information document COP19 Inf 29 on engaging Indigenous peoples and local communities in international policy and decision-making, lessons for CITES from the multilateral environmental and human rights processes. This document provides examples of mechanisms in other MEAs, some of which could be considered to be more current than equivalent CITES mechanisms and may be relevant in the CITES context. We propose a new recommendation to ensure the topics raised in this document can be actively considered in the evaluation process described at paragraph 8. Wording, for example, could be, the working group take into account the topics raised in COP19 Inf 29 on engaging Indigenous peoples and local communities in international policy and decision-making, lessons for CITES from multilateral environmental and human rights processes. Chair, with your indulgence, New Zealand would like to invite Ngā Iwi o Taranaki Collective to briefly speak on the New Zealand mic on this agenda item at the appropriate time, as they do not have a dedicated mic. Thank you.
Thank you, New Zealand. As a member of the Standing Committee, you can have whoever you like speak on your mic whenever you feel it's appropriate.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Madam Chair, the Secretariat, our host Switzerland and Canada for leading this working group. Ngā Iwi o Taranaki is a collective of 8 Indigenous Māori peoples from the region of Taranaki in Aotearoa, New Zealand. This is our third CITES forum in the past 12 months, previously attending COP19 and the IPLC working group in Peru, where we were surprised to be the only mandated Indigenous group in attendance. We respectfully ask this convention to seriously consider the efficacy of having such conversations about Indigenous people without Indigenous people. Our particular interest here is that CITES heavily impedes centuries-old intercultural Māori and oceanic traditions around the creation, transport and gifting of taonga, our sacred cultural items. Whalebone and ivory provide succinct examples. We only utilise such marine mammal resources as they present themselves to us through natural attrition, i.e. strandings. We do not and have never hunted whales for food, oil or ivory. We do not trade as per the Western definition. These items are not created for monetary gain but rather provide intrinsic sacred cultural value, and we ask that a recommendation be made for less onerous permitting models be explored for our part of the world by the working group. We also fully support the Secretariat's recommendation 14.B in document 28.2 that review of the use of IPLC terminology be added to the working group's future mandate, and endorse the guidance in Info Doc 10 from the UN Special Mechanisms on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, recommending terminology separation. Madam Chair, we seek better outcomes for all Indigenous peoples within CITES and look forward to the convention exploring, consulting on and developing mechanisms which support Indigenous peoples to live proud, culturally authentic Indigenous lives. Thank you, Madam Chair, for your indulgence. Kia ora.
Thank you, New Zealand. I open the floor to observer parties and give the floor to Burkina Faso.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Burkina Faso would like to congratulate the chair of the working group for so successfully leading the working group's discussions and for the preparation and presentation of this report. We have just one comment. From our point of view, with respect to non-binding guidance, consultations with indigenous peoples and local communities should involve all stakeholders and not just indigenous peoples and local communities that are involved in international trade. By way of example, I would suggest that some communities might be affected by deforestation, and international trade in timber species without they themselves being involved in such trade. We therefore feel that the Standing Committee should take note of the status of these discussions and that the working group carry on with this work and report to SC 78. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Burkina Faso. I give the floor to China, and I will also open the floor for observer organizations.
Thank you, Madam Chair. China has closely worked with the working group members under the well-organized leadership of chairs of DOC 28 and DOC 29, and we will continue contribute in the working group and looks forward to a more positive results on both IPLC engagement and livelihoods. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, China. And so I'm going to close the list now. And I don't have any more parties wishing to take the floor, but I would ask that New Zealand read their additional recommendation out again.
Thank you. The working group take into account the topics raised in COP19 INF 29, and then it's got the long title of that document. If you want me to read that out, it's called On Engaging Indigenous Peoples and Local Communities in International Policy and Decision Making. Lessons for CITES from Multilateral Environmental and Human Rights Processes. Thank you.
And so it would be in their as they continue their discussions in the working group.
Sorry.
So it would be as like you're taken into account in future discussions
yes.
in the working group.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
And I'd like to give the floor to Canada if they have any thoughts on that.
Thank you. No, we welcome the addition suggested by New Zealand. I believe our initial discussions did already start to take into account some of the topics in that information document, if I can recall correctly. And of course, the working group is mandated by the Standing Committee, so we will do the tasks that you ask us. So thank you.
Thank you, Canada. And so I give the floor to Traffic for a brief 1-minute intervention.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Traffic fully supports the proposal to expand the mandate of the working group to consider the examination of the terminology used in the CITES context when referring to terms such as indigenous peoples, local communities, or rural communities. We believe this not only ensure clarity and consistency in the language used in CITES resolutions and decisions, but will also ensure a closer alignment and facilitate greater collaboration with the related work of other MEAs, including implementation of the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. In this regard, we would like to suggest some guidance for the discussions could be provided by the online core glossary of IPBES or the glossary that is in the Annex 1 of the IPBES Assessment Report on the Sustainable Use of Wild Species. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I will give the floor for a brief 1-minute intervention to Conservation Alliance Kenya.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Since the Conservation Alliance is taking the floor for the first time, we want to congratulate you for the good leadership. And I want to make this intervention on behalf of the Amboseli Ecosystem Trust, the Pan-African Wildlife Conservation Network, the David Shepard Wildlife Foundation, the Franz Weber Foundation, Pan-African Sanctuary Alliance, and the Born Free Foundation. We support the Standing Committee noting the progress made and the report of the group report and the Secretariat report. And further, we support working group members who consider that the working group mandate does not include enhancing IPLC participation in international processes, but is also focused on effectively engaging IPLC at the national level. Decisions 18.31, which established the working group, should be read with decision 19.57, which limits the scope to the national level. We also support Burkina Faso's recommendations regarding consultations on IPLCs on proposals. Any consultation should include relevant IPLC stakeholders at national level and not be limited to IPLC engagement in international trade. Further, we support the majority view of the working group deliberations that national government should be responsible for improving IPLC's consultation and building IPLC's capacity to engage and participate at the national and international level.
Conservation Alliance, you have exceeded your intervention limit.
Just about to end.
Yep, please wrap it up.
Thank you. IPLCs may not be engaged in trade, but may still be affected by trade. And so in developing the 9 guiding guidelines, we recommend the inclusion of the role of the traditional knowledge in developing NDFs, and then the funding mechanisms, and then also inclusion of IPLCs in the government delegations. So finally, we note that decision 17.7 gives the Standing Committee mandate to examine terminology. Therefore, we support the proposal to include the mandate to the intersessional group on IPLC engagement, considering the terminologies of indigenous people, local communities, and rural communities. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I'm going to give it to the floor to Gabon, and then we're going to not take any more comments on this one and just work with the Standing Committee.
Merci. Thank you, Madam Chair. Gabon would simply like to briefly state that as members of the working group, we would stress that we need to examine the terminology used to describe indigenous peoples, local communities, and rural communities. In some countries, like Gabon, there is no specific term used for indigenous peoples. They are simply referred to as local communities. So we need to consider the language used and ensure that what is said is in keeping with the legislation in the parties and ensure that the working group reflects that. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabon. And so focusing in on the Standing Committee, it looks like we have we're invited to take note of this interim document that was provided by from Canada, and then we do have a new recommendation from New Zealand that I would like to just make sure we're in agreement of considering. And so it would be a new recommendation that the Standing Committee recommends that the Standing Committee Working Group on Engagement of Indigenous People and Local Communities incorporate topics raised in COP19 and DOC 29 as appropriate as the working group continues its intersessional work. Agreement? Okay. So with that, I will note all of the comments that were made on the floor, and we will close this agenda item, and we will move on to the next one, which is the report of the Secretariat. 28.2 on engagement of Indigenous peoples and local communities. I heard some comments that spilled over from the last topic into this one, and so I would ask if you did make those comments regarding terminology, this is the time to bring it up. Okay, so there is no updates from the Secretariat on this document, and so we can hop right in and have some discussion. And so I open the floor to members of the Standing Committee for their comments on document 28.2, the report of the Secretariat. And I give the floor to Poland.
Yep. Thank you, Madam Chair. On Doc 28.2, we wish to thank the Secretariat for the report and express our support for both recommendations. And regarding paragraph 13 of the report, where the Secretariat states that the SC may wish to clarify the indigenous people and local communities in the CITES context should be understood to include rural communities, we wish to underline that this is a question that should be discussed in the working group on engagement of indigenous peoples and local communities first. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Poland. I give the floor to the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Chair. We note the document and the suggestion by the Secretariat for the Standing Committee to consider including a task in Decision 17.57 to examine terminology used in different resolutions and decisions when referring to Indigenous peoples, local communities or rural communities within the mandate of the working group. Whilst IPLCs is broadly the accepted definition used in international fora such as CBD and UNFCCC, and we would also support its continued use in CITES, it should not be used interchangeably with the term rural communities. However, we would agree that there is need for consistency to ensure all parties are working to the same definitions and therefore agree that the mandate of the working group should cover this task. Thank you.
Thank you, United Kingdom. Any other comments from members of the Standing Committee? I open the floor to observer parties. I give the floor to the United States.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The United States notes the document and supports the recommendation to consider including the task in Decision 17.57, Rev. Cop 19, to examine terminology used in different resolutions and decisions when referring to Indigenous peoples, local communities, and rural communities, and make recommendations to COP 20 on the need for consistency of terminology across resolutions and decisions as a mandate of the Intersessional Working Group on IPLC engagements. It is important to note that Indigenous peoples may be granted certain rights by the government or occupy lands independent of the governing party and often possess knowledge of local land and resources referred to as Indigenous and Local Knowledge, or ILK, that must be respected and protected. While it is not strictly necessary to adopt a uniform term, and there may continue to be reasons to specify a different term in certain contexts, in general, we prefer use of the term Indigenous People and Local Communities, IPLCs, as it is widely used terminology in international fora and broadly encompasses the various terms that have been used in the CITES context over the years. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, the United States. I give the floor now to Canada.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As a member of the working group, we want to express our deepest gratitude to Peru for hosting the meeting and for their warm hospitality. We're optimistic with the progress made during the meeting as well as during our online exchanges. We look forward to continuation of our work to address our important mandate. We also want to express our support for the Secretariat's recommendation outlined in paragraph 14B of Doc 28.2 to add the task of examining the terminology used in CITES context when referring to Indigenous people, local communities, or rural communities in the mandate of the working group. We agree with the Secretariat's assessment that the choice of terminology implies complex political, legal consideration that warrants careful deliberation. We believe that the Intersessional Working Group is the right venue to have these discussions, and we look forward to engaging and sharing our perspective on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Canada. I give the floor to Zimbabwe, and I will open the floor briefly for a few observer organizations to provide comments.
Okay, thank you, Chair. On document 28.2, we also agree with the recommendation to consider including the task in decision 17.57 Rev COP19 concerning the examination of the terminology used in the CITES context when referring to indigenous peoples and local communities or rural communities in the mandate of the intersessional working group on IPLC engagement. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Zimbabwe. I give the floor to Chad.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We would like to thank the Secretariat for having drafted this report. We feel that it is important to look at ways in which parties work with local communities and indigenous peoples nationally. We support recommendation 14B, which says that the task in decision 1757 Rev COP19 should be included in the examination of terminology. We do need to consider the terminology used in referring to indigenous peoples, local communities, and rural communities in order to ensure that we use appropriate terminology and that we agree on the use of such terms. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Chad. And so what I'm hearing from the floor, the representative from the United States supports the use of IPLCs. However, there is a general support from folks in the committee and even that this is a term that could be considered further in the intersessional working group. And so I think we are good on recommendation 14A, that we note the present document. They're in agreement to note the present document. And then for recommendation B, how does the committee feel about expanding the mandate of the intersessional working group to include this terminology? Supportive, supportive, supportive. All right. So the committee agrees to recommendation B to consider including the task in decision 17.57 Rev COP19 concerning the examination of the terminology used in the CITES context when referring to indigenous people, local communities, or rural communities, and its mandate of the intersessional working group on IPLC engagement. I will note all the comments made on the floor, and with that, I close this agenda item, and we will move to the next one, which is agenda item 29, livelihoods. I want to offer the floor to Peru or Zambia as the chair of this intersessional working group, if they'd like to provide any updates or I give the floor to Zambia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll give a brief statement on behalf of our co-chair and ourselves. The Republics of Zambia and Peru, as co-chairs of the working group CITES and Livelihoods, appreciate the support of the Secretariat and are grateful to the Republic of China and WCS for making possible the in-person joint meeting of the Working Group on CITES and Livelihoods and the Working Group on Engagement of Indigenous Peoples and Local Communities, which was held in Peru. We further wish to commend members of the two groups for their excellent work during the engagement. Significant progress has been made with mandates 2 and 3, and wish to inform the committee that the group will continue its work online and will forward its progress report to SC 78. Thank you.
Thank you for the summary and update, Zambia, and thank you again to Peru for hosting the joint meeting of the IPLC engagement and the Livelihoods Working Group. And with that, I will open the floor to comments from members of the Standing Committee. I'll open the floor to observer parties. The United Kingdom, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. We note the progress made by the Working Party and supports the suggestion that parties should, where possible, consult with IPLCs within their country on the full guidance. We would also like to suggest that the working group may wish to discuss parties including livelihood considerations when determining non-detriment findings, noting that this is due for discussion at the non-detriment finding workshop next month. Thank you.
I open the floor to, it's open for observer parties, and I'm going to open it to observer organizations. All right, well, I'm not seeing any requests for the floor, and so the committee agrees to adopt recommendation 14 for the committee to note the progress and next steps of the working group on livelihoods and take into consideration the comment made by the United Kingdom. So with this, I close this agenda item. And thank you guys all for your support in making it thus far. We have exhausted the schedule we had, the program we had for the morning. And so if the committee is up for it, we can move into the couple of the items we had for the afternoon, which would be item number 46, legal acquisition findings, and item number 52, transport of live specimens, and we can take up executive summary 1 and 2. We can move forward. Okay, we'll move to agenda item 46 on legal acquisition findings. Okay, so there is no additional information from the Secretariat on this document, so there won't be an introduction, and so we can start with discussions on document SC 7746 with members of the Standing Committee, and the recommendations are contained in paragraph 12. So the floor is open to members of the Standing Committee. I'll also open the floor to observer parties. The United States.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The United States supports exchanging knowledge and sharing best practices regarding the implementation of Resolution Conference 18.7 Rev COP19 to assist other parties. However, the United States has concerns regarding having legal acquisition findings available on the CITES webpage, as these findings often contain sensitive information. Redacting sensitive information takes time and specialized knowledge. We also note that the RAPID guide is not prescriptive and is designed to be used as a complement to existing tools, adapted to different taxa or adopted whole scale as CITES authorities think appropriate. This clarification is important because certain portions of the guide may not be implementable by all parties. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, United States. I open the floor to observer organizations. FAO, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. FAO would like to emphasize the ongoing progress in the development of CITES LACS, referred to in Doc 46. CITES LACS is an online information system that will provide national catalogs of legislation and policies relevant to the implementation of CITES, aiming to support parties in the making of legal acquisition findings. FAO will continue collaborating with the CITES Secretariat to enhance the features and ease of use of CITES LACS, in particular to ensure the relevance and accuracy of the catalogs prior to the official launching of the website. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, FAO. Any other comments? And so I'll go back to the representative from the United States. Are you looking for an editorial comment or edit on A or B? I think if listening to your comment, there could be something along the lines of encourage parties to implement Resolution 18.7, Rev Cop 19, and use the rapid guide for making legal acquisition findings as appropriate when preparing their legal acquisition findings. And there was also a comment about sharing on the CITES website. So my proposal could be something along the lines of invite parties to, where possible, share their legal acquisition findings on building knowledge and sharing best practices regarding the implementation of Resolution Conf 18.7, Rev Cop 19, and request the CITES Secretariat to make any shared legal acquisition findings available on the CITES website, again, as appropriate. How does the committee feel about those two additional edits? I got one head nod. Yeah, good. Okay. So with that, the committee the committee agrees to recommendations in paragraph 12 with the two edits as I have just read out, and notes the comments made by the United States on the floor. And with that, I conclude this agenda item, and we will move forward to item number 52, transport of live specimens. I give the floor to the Secretariat for an update.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I would really skip the introduction, but there's one amendment in the recommendation. I would like to thank the Wildlife Conservation Society for providing the funding for the proposed virtual workshop on transport of live specimen, which is scheduled for March 2024. Tentatively, we are going to inform the specific date through a notification. And hence, in light of this, the Secretary invites the Standing Committee to adopt the recommendation available in paragraph 11 with a small amendment in B, delete, subject to the availability of external funds.
Okay. Thank you, Secretariat. With that, I open the floor to members of the Standing Committee for any comments on this document. I give the floor to the United States.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The North American region agrees to the terms of reference for the workshop provided by the Secretariat and supports the organization of the workshop, by the Secretariat, but have several amendments for the terms of reference. First, for clarification, we subdivide paragraph B into two sections as follows. B, understanding the process for amending and revising the current methods in the law to meet safer transport methods, semicolon, amending ambiguous texts, and add a new subparagraph C, which reads, understanding the principles of live animal container design and the guidelines for evaluating the number of animals that can be transported together. To address risks to staff handling live wildlife shipments, we also propose adding text to the current paragraph C, which then becomes new paragraph D and would now read, inspections and enforcement.
One second. Just give me 1 second, okay. Just to make sure I have it right, we're splitting B into two sections. So one is understanding the process for the container.
Understanding the process for amending and revising the current methods in the LAR to meet safer transport methods, semicolon, amending ambiguous texts. And the new subparagraph C, which would read, understanding the principles of live animal container design and the guidelines for evaluating the number of animals that can be transported together.
Okay, thank you.
And then the new paragraph D, which would read, inspections and enforcement and the role of border control authorities, semicolon, methods for sharing experiences on transport inspections, semicolon, use of PPE and other guidance to ensure the safety and security of peoples interacting directly with live, injured, sick, or dead specimens. I can repeat that again.
Yes, just a little bit slower, please.
So new paragraph, subparagraph D, inspections and enforcement and the role of border control authorities, semicolon, methods for sharing experiences on transport inspection, semicolon, use of PPE and other guidance to ensure the safety and security of peoples interacting directly with live, injured, sick, or dead specimens. And then the items following this paragraph will need to be relettered. Do you need that repeated again? The very end of that? And other guidance to ensure the safety and security of peoples interacting directly with live, injured, sick, or dead specimens. And then we'll need to reletter the remaining subparagraphs. And we propose a third objective in the expected deliverables section. When you're ready, I'll read that out. Good. So a third objective in the expected deliverables section would read as follows. 3, period, compilation of experiences and best practices of the parties related to the transport of live animals and plants.
Are there anything in addition?
No.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I open it up for observer parties for any comments on the document. And I open it up to observer organizations. And I give the floor to Ayada.
Thank you, Chair. IATA is fully committed to supporting Decision 19.15.8 by sharing our expertise and best practices in live animal and plant transport. We are eager to participate in the proposed virtual workshop, contributing to a comprehensive understanding of the IATA live animals regulations and perishable cargo regulations and their practical application. Furthermore, in response to Decision 19.15.9, we are working closely with CITES Secretariat to explore solutions to ease the accessibility for regulations to all stakeholders involved in the transport of live specimens. We believe that knowledge is the cornerstone of compliance and are dedicated to ensuring that this knowledge is up to date and accessible. Our live animals regulations and perishable cargo regulations are updated yearly to reflect the latest standards and are now published in English, Spanish, French, and Chinese, catering to a global audience. These manuals are available in both print and digital formats, ensuring they are accessible to all. Our focus is on easing compliance with the latest regulations and standards. To this end, we are developing the LAR Verify solution, an online portal that will provide instant access to regulatory requirements and other useful information. Thank you.
Thank you, IATA. I give the floor to Waza for a brief intervention.
Thank you, Chair. This intervention is made on behalf of AZA, IAZA, San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance, CERESL, and WASA. As established in the CITES WASA Memorandum of Understanding, we're committed to sharing our expertise with CITES on live animal transport matters, and therefore share our availability to contribute to the upcoming virtual workshop on transport of live specimens. As recognized in Decision 19.159, it is essential that the IATA live animal regulations are readily available, accessible, not only to parties, but also to exporters, transporters, and importers to fully comply with all IATA regulations, particularly as these are frequently updated. We therefore call on the Secretariat to include the broader accessibility of the live animal regulations in their continuous discussions with IATA. We support the recommendation in paragraph 11, document 52, and encourage the Secretariat to include interested importers, exporters, and transporters as participants in the workshop, given their expertise and need to comply with the IATA regulations. Thank you.
Thank you, Waza. I give the floor to Belgium.
Thank you, Chair. We would like to make our supports for the headings, but we have only, we want to share our concerns about the headings made by the USA for point D, because we believe, we share also the concern from the USA about human health, but it seems out of the scope of the IATA regulations, which are on how to regulate transport of animals, and therefore do not feel it's appropriate to include this in the guideline. Thank you.
Thank you, Belgium. I give the floor to the United States.
Thank you, Chair. The United States, speaking as the United States, we're interested in hearing updates from the Secretariat on the progress of the implementation also of Decision 19.159 with regards to making relevant sections of the IATA LAR and perishables cargo regulations more easily available to parties. We note that the IATA Live Animals and Perishable Board will be meeting in Geneva next week following the conclusion of the Standing Committee meeting, and the United States, as a member of the IATA Animal Advisory Board, will be attending the LAPB and would be available to assist the Secretariat in pursuing further progress on making these important regulations available to parties. We'd also like to thank Wildlife Conservation Society for providing the Secretariat with all of the requested funding for this workshop. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, United States. I give the floor briefly to the Animal Welfare Institute.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm making this intervention on behalf of 13 observer organizations whose names will be provided to the Secretariat. We welcome the proposals for the virtual workshop on transport of live specimens. We also encourage the Standing Committee to consider measures to evaluate and reduce the risk of pathogen spillover during transport of live animals, the establishment of responsibilities for ensuring compliance with transport guidelines at all stages of transport, the need for the development of further species-specific transport guidelines, and arrangements for further regular review and revision of CITES non-air transport guidelines as called for in paragraph 2E of Res Comp 10.21 Rev COP 19. Finally, we thank the Wildlife Conservation Society for the funding it has provided for the workshop, and we urge the Secretariat to move ahead with organization of the workshop, to which observer organizations with interest and expertise in this issue should be invited. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, AWI. And not seeing any more requests for the floor, I'll do a quick summary of what I've heard. And we will also address the question just raised by the representative for the United States. And so I will give the floor first to the Secretariat to provide an update.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the United States for making that comment, and we appreciate the support and the cooperation extended to the Secretariat from the United States on these issues. Regarding the implementation of Decision 19159, the Secretariat would like to update the committee that since COP19, the Secretariat has been in discussion with the International IATA concerning the possibility of providing access to relevant sections of live animal regulations and perishable cargo regulations to the parties at no cost. As of the last meeting took place in October last month, and we have discussed the possibility of this access. As of now, we are still waiting, as probably you have heard from the colleagues representative from IATA, a response from IATA, and we have not yet found a solution to this accessibility. However, I just would also like to mention that the CITES Secretariat is very much invited by IATA and is planning to attend the LAPB taking place next week in Geneva at the IATA headquarters. And we continue to work on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat. And so what I have heard is we've had some amendments by the representative from the United States to add a new paragraph under the contents. And so I'm going to have the Secretariat read that out for consideration by the committee.
So the amendments proposed by United States to paragraph B was to delete the term including crate design and to add a new paragraph C in this section, which would read understanding the principles of live animal container design and the guidelines for evaluating the number of animals that can be transported together. So that was the new paragraph C.
And then there was one more addition. We had a revised paragraph D, but I did not hear support for that addition. The representative from Belgium was not supportive, and I didn't hear any other support for that. So is there support for the revised paragraph D? United States, do you have a comment? Okay, if I don't see any support for that, I will leave the paragraph as is. I'm seeing some support for leaving it as is. Okay, and then there was an additional deliverable that was provided by the United States, which would be a compilation, a new expected deliverable 3, a compilation of experiences and best practices of the parties related to the transport of live animals and plants. Is there support for adding that as an additional deliverable from the workshop, for the workshop? I'm seeing some head nods. Yes? Okay, so we will agree to that amendment also in the expected deliverables. And so with that, the Standing Committee agrees to the terms of reference as amended, as we just amended on the floor. for the virtual workshop on transport of live specimens so that the Secretariat may finalize them after the 77th meeting, and invite the Secretariat to organize the workshop in accordance with the terms and reference, and to collaborate with experts from parties, non-governmental organizations, and other stakeholders as resource persons. And with that, I close this. I'll note all the comments made on the floor and close this agenda item. And so in the last few minutes, we can take up Executive Summary 1 and 2. Okay, so I'll start by giving the floor to the Secretariat.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to clarify the difference between executive summary and summary record, because some of you might not be familiar with it, especially if you're more used to COP proceedings. It is a bit different in the Standing Committee. So just to make things quite simple, I'm just going to read the rules of procedure, and especially Rule 19. So Rule 19, a concise executive summary of the decisions of the committee shall be prepared by the Secretariat for endorsement by the committee before the closure of the meeting. However, the executive summary of the last day of each meeting, which is today, shall be sent by email to the members and acting regional members for endorsement after the meeting. The decisions of the committee shall come into effect upon endorsement of the executive summary in which they are contained. That's the executive summary. So it's the executive summary. So a summary of the decisions. Then separately, afterwards, we'll do the summary record. So a consolidated summary record of each meeting shall be prepared by the Secretariat and made available on the CITES website within 40 days. They shall be presented in the order of the agenda and comprise 3 parts for each agenda item. A short statement indicating the main points of the discussion, the text indicating the decision that was made as it appears in the executive summary, and the text of any statements provided by the representative of any party that was read into the record during the meeting. The list of members and observers participating in the debate shall be included in the summary record as well. The Secretariat shall take into account the comments received within 20 days of the circulation, and, upon approval of the chair of the committee, the Secretariat shall make the final summary record available on the website of the convention. So that's just wanted to make quickly that difference between the executive summary, which you have in hand, and the summary record. We will basically include the summary of the interventions. That's the main difference. And if you allow me, chairs, 2 errors were brought to my attention for executive summary 2. I don't know if you want me to read them out right away. Yeah. So I think nothing was brought to my attention for executive summary 1, but for executive summary 2, under agenda item 33.2, so it's page 3 in English, expedited application of Article 13 for West African rosewood, Pterocarpus erinaceus. We had agreed to move 2 recommendations that were included in the Nigeria document, application of Article 13 in Nigeria, and basically because it applied to all range states, which is what was agreed by the committee. So I simply copied and pasted those recommendations, but I forgot to delete from Nigeria. So the first, on the 33.2, the first paragraph should read, the committee encouraged all potential transit and destination countries of shipments of illegal specimens of Pterocarpus erinaceus, and there we will need to strike out from Nigeria, and it will continue to take appropriate measures, etc. So just strike out from Nigeria in that paragraph. And the other element, which is more editorial, it was agreed that again, under this agenda item, for each country-specific recommendation, we should just harmonize the language when we refer to the recommendations that are short-term and long-term. So it should read, for instance, for the Gambia, but it should be applied throughout. The same language should be used throughout. It should read, agreed that the short and long-term RST recommendations, and then in parenthesis, paragraphs A through D, have not been implemented. Just really specifying whether it's short-term and long-term and just referring back to the relevant paragraphs. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. Now I open the floor for comments on Executive Summary 1. Not seeing any comments on Executive Summary 1, so the committee adopts Executive Summary Number 1. Moving on to Executive Summary Number 2, opening the floor for comments for Executive Summary Number 2, taking into consideration the two comments just made by the Secretariat. Yep, the floor is open for everyone to provide comments. I don't see any comments on Executive Summary Number 2. So the committee adopts Executive Summary Number 2 with the comments made by the Secretariat. Are you guys ready for Executive Number 3, or do you want to break for lunch 5 minutes early and come back at 1:55? Keep going? Okay, we will break for lunch a little bit early, and we'll see you guys here at 1:55 to continue with the executive summary and the COM docs.